Chapter 76. The woman hesitated, clearly reluctant, but after glancing at Kleiber's miserable state, she finally handed over the card. Although she averted her gaze, a fleeting guilt flashing in her eyes. Most of the money had already been spent. As for where it went, she instinctively touched her earrings and necklace, keeping silent. Cyr didn't reach for the card. Instead, he stared at the woman with an impassive expression. So, the card's empty, she's already spent it all. Probably on jewelry and clothes. Whatever. Kleiber Far himself is still worth 200 million. Better than nothing. Even if I kill her, I wouldn't get any extra money anyway. What a hassle. Maybe I should just kill her too. This handsome young man, what are you thinking about? The woman's instincts made her speak up immediately. Those instincts had saved her life countless times before. She had a nagging feeling that if she didn't speak now, she might never get the chance again. Forget it. Cyr shifted his gaze and, without turning back, raised his hand and made a slight motion with his fingers. Behind him, Kleiber's life was instantly extinguished. The man's head rolled to Cyr's feet with a dull thud. "You can leave now," he said, casually kicking the head like a soccer ball, rolling it back and forth under his foot. At the same time, he pulled out his phone to submit the bounty task and notify the local police to clean up the scene. The woman, now pale and trembling, didn't dare say a word. Hearing his final remark, she turned and fled without looking back. Half an hour later, the police arrived and efficiently cleaned up the mess. The bounty money was transferred to Cyr's account. "Finally, all the tasks I took on are done," Cyr muttered as he strolled down the street, putting away his phone after seeing the payment notification. He had no intention of taking on any more tasks. Hunting criminals was too troublesome, and honestly, a bit boring. Cyr freely admitted to himself that he was someone with only fleeting enthusiasm. He had chosen to become a bounty hunter in the first place simply because it seemed cool. After all, in many novels, characters with bounty hunter identities were always mysterious, stylish, and badass. For someone with a deep love for anime and a flair for dramatics, the appeal had been irresistible. So he decided to give it a shot. After trying it out, Cyr quickly found bounty hunting dull. He lost interest and decided to switch directions. Yorknew's second-hand markets operated both day and night. During the daytime, the goods at the market were fairly ordinary, with moderate value. Most vendors were regular people. But at night, Cyr's gaze swept over items still stained with blood or dirt, and he smirked. These were either looted from murders, stolen from ruins, or dug up from someone's grave. The vendors at night were clearly not amateurs. They set reasonable prices, not expensive, but not cheap enough to yield significant profit. At best, you might snag a small bargain, but nothing substantial. After browsing the entire market, Cyr concluded it was all the same. No real treasures to be found, and no great deals. Plus, without proper documentation or certificates, these goods were difficult to resell. Buying anything might just leave him stuck with it. So, Cyr didn't buy anything, casually wandering through the market instead. "My current balance is 4.5 billion, he calculated, clicking his tongue in disbelief. Half of that came from the casino, and the other half from exploiting criminals. Even so, it wasn't enough to reach 5 billion. He still needed another 5.5 billion to buy his next target. Such a pain," he muttered, kicking a small rock in irritation. He suddenly turned and snapped, "Come out." The pebble, propelled by his kick, turned into a bullet-like projectile, striking someone behind him in the knee with pinpoint accuracy. The man screamed as he fell to one knee, clutching his leg. Being broke was frustrating enough, having rats tailing him made it worse. The rest of the group hidden in the crowd took the hint and bolted. Cyr glanced at the fleeing figures, saying nothing as he shifted his gaze. The next moment, The running silhouettes were sliced clean in half. Screams erupted as bystanders scattered, clearing the area. To the terrified onlookers, it seemed as if the runners had been sliced apart out of nowhere, a scene straight out of a horror movie. The man with the injured knee staggered to his feet, trying to escape on his good leg. But when he saw what happened to his companions, he wisely gave up on the idea. "Why were you following me?" Seer asked, walking up to the man. Without waiting for a response, he kicked him squarely in the stomach. After kicking the man to the ground, Seer stood over him, gazing down with an air of disdain. Useless trash like this should only look up to him from below. "Hey, no need to be so violent, right? This road isn't yours," the man said awkwardly, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he suppressed the pain. "Ah, true." Seer nodded in agreement. This wasn't his private road, after all. It seemed as though the man's words had convinced him, as the white-haired boy gave a slight nod. But before the man's face could light up in relief, his head was cleanly severed from his neck. "However, you got one thing wrong. I don't need a reason to kill you." The white-haired, blue-eyed boy crouched down calmly and retrieved a camera from the now headless corpse. Flipping through the pictures, he discovered they were all of him. "Not bad. You actually captured me quite handsomely," Seer muttered, stroking his chin with a tone full of admiration. He had noticed these guys lurking in the crowd and secretly taking pictures of him ever since the second-hand market. They had been following him ever since. If they hadn't trailed him, he wouldn't have cared about being photographed. Being good-looking and snapped by strangers wasn't new to him, he was used to it. Back at cosplay events, hundreds, even thousands of people would line up for photos with him. But stalking? That was crossing the line. Still, what were they planning to do with my photos? Seer mused, looking at the images of himself with slight confusion. Were they planning to sell his pictures to some rich socialite or elderly admirer with unique tastes? Once someone showed interest, they'd kidnap him and deliver him to the buyer. This was Yorknew, after all, a city controlled by the mafia. Such a scenario wasn't impossible. "Should have left one alive," Seer lamented. Pretend to be weak, let them successfully kidnap him, wake up in some rich widow's or old man's bedroom, scare them half to death, kill a few of their henchmen as a warning, then sit down for a nice, polite discussion about mental damages. As an innocent tourist, being kidnapped deserved compensation, didn't it? It was only fair. If that worked, the remaining 5.5 billion wouldn't be a problem at all. Damn it, killed them too fast. Can't let that happen next time, Seer muttered, clutching his chest in frustration. Missing out on billions truly left him heartbroken. Still, he couldn't just keep the photos. Who knew if someone in this world had an ability tied to photos for nefarious purposes? With that in mind, he casually tossed the camera to the ground and crushed it underfoot. Hopefully, even without the photos, someone would come looking for him. Good luck, guys. My next purchase depends on you. Don't keep me waiting too long. With a spring in his step, Seer hummed a light-hearted tune and walked away. Hey hunters, quick little break. Hope you're enjoying the chaos so far. Grab a snack, stretch your neck, and let's keep going. Blue heart emoji. Chapter 77. The door to the hotel room silently swung open. Several figures rushed into the room, rummaging through everything. They left no corner untouched, even checking under the bed, but their target was nowhere to be found. "Are you looking for me?" a voice drawled from the doorway. Everyone in the room turned to see their target, a white-haired, blue-eyed boy leaning lazily against the doorframe, arms crossed as he looked at them with a calm expression. "The third wave," Seer muttered, covering his mouth with one hand as he stifled a yawn, while his other hand flicked nonchalantly. In the blink of an eye, everyone in the room was neatly dismembered. The carpet, already dark red from blood, seemed to turn even darker. The thick scent of blood was so overpowering that no amount of perfume could mask it. Who exactly has their sights set on me this time? I don't even know who to bill for emotional damages anymore, Seer sighed, pushing the door open wider to signal the attendant waiting in the hallway to come in and clean up. He then pulled over a random chair and sat in the hallway outside the room. This was already the third wave of attackers he'd encountered in 2 days. They were skilled in picking locks, scaling walls, and launching assaults with barely a word. Some had even resorted to tossing explosives into his room. He'd already changed rooms twice, and the hotel staff were one step away from begging him to move to a different hotel entirely. Seer found it puzzling. He'd been prepared to be tailed or even kidnapped, but these three groups clearly hadn't come to capture him, they'd come to kill him. The first 2 waves had left him curious, and he'd spared a few of them to interrogate. But those people were like fanatical death soldiers, preferring suicide over revealing a single piece of information. They didn't even carry anything that might identify their employer. By the time the third group arrived, Seer was too bored to even bother asking questions. What was the point of all this? He had only just arrived in Yorknew and hadn't offended anyone, had he? He always made an effort to be polite and helpful, and by his reckoning, there was no one who could have a grudge against him. The only one I've had issues with was Dorink, and he's already dead. I just don't get it. He muttered, sitting back in his chair with a sigh. Oh well. Whoever came after him, he'd just kill them all. The attendant dragged the dismembered corpses out one by one with a practiced calm, as if such scenes were a daily occurrence. This was, after all, Yorknew, a city controlled by the Mafia. The largest hotel in town was also Mafia-owned, and its attendants were all Mafia members themselves. It made perfect sense. The bodies were tossed into the trash bin on the housekeeping cart. The blood-soaked carpet was rolled up and added to the cart as well. Using a mop and a damp cloth, the attendant meticulously cleaned every trace of blood, then sprayed the room with perfume and opened the windows to air it out. Before long, the room was spotless, as if nothing had happened. Once the cleaning was complete, the attendant pushed the cart full of bodies and bloodied items away. 2 factions, huh? Seer mused, lying down on the freshly changed bedding. Didn't Marrow mention that this hotel is under Parrish's control? His voice trailed off thoughtfully. Assassins came after him, and the hotel turned a blind eye. When Seer killed his would-be attackers, the hotel still didn't care. They simply had the cleaning crew tidy up. Ordinary people wouldn't dare stir up trouble in a Mafia-controlled hotel, so it was clear the ones trying to assassinate him were also part of the Mafia. The problem was, Yorknew had so many Mafia factions that it was impossible to pinpoint who was behind it. Come to think of it, if there's a Mafia association, there should be a Mafia website too, right? Just like hunters have their own hunter website, the Mafia should have something similar. Maybe I can find some useful information on there. The only catch? He wasn't part of the Mafia, so he didn't know where to access their website. But that wasn't really a problem, he could just buy the intel from the hunter website. With that thought, Seer sat up, walked over to the computer in his room, and turned it on. After verifying his hunter license, he logged into the Hunter Tavern and clicked on the bartender's option to buy information. He selected information on the Mafia website. For 500,000 Jenny, he successfully obtained the URL. As for how to get in afterward, this computer should be enough for me, he murmured, typing the URL into the browser. His fingers flew over the keyboard, lines of code flashing and disappearing as he bypassed the site's identity verification. 2 minutes and 17 seconds. I'm rusty. Haven't touched a computer in a while, he sighed, looking at the timer. Computer skills had been part of his core education from a young age. If he had chosen to graduate at 22 and become a programmer, he'd be the dream candidate for any company, a 22-year-old with 20 years of experience. Not that he'd ever consider becoming a programmer, past or future. The Mafia website was somewhat similar to the dark web, filled with gruesome videos and a plethora of bounty listings displayed openly. It didn't take Seer long to find information about himself. After all, the homepage featured multiple posts about him. Close-up photos of his face dominated the page, with his striking eyes taking up a third of the frame, catching everyone's attention. Are this guy's eyes really not made of liquid gemstones? A beauty to rival scarlet eyes and liquid gemstones. Even I, someone who's never been interested in human organs, feel tempted. Collectors of human parts, are you tempted too? What price are you willing to pay for these sky blue gems? All the photos were secretly taken. Some even went as far as to label each of his body parts with corresponding prices. Plenty of people were also openly declaring their intent to take on the bounty. When Seer checked the timestamps, the earliest photo was uploaded 3 days ago. In other words, the very day he arrived in Yorknu, his photos had been posted on the Mafia website, and he was instantly treated like an auction item by the Mafia. This is ridiculous. Seer pressed his hand to his forehead in exasperation. He had spent half a year in Meteor City without anyone targeting his eyes. Granted, he mostly stayed in the Chapel district for training, rarely venturing out. Even when he did, he used his teleportation ability, so most people couldn't even catch a glimpse of him, let alone his eyes. Afterward, he went through the hunter exam and even spent time in the Heavens Arena without attracting this kind of attention. But the moment he arrived in Yorknu, he got targeted, or rather, they had already started auctioning off his eyes. Setting aside how dangerous it was, the level of depravity here outstripped even Gotham. At least those places didn't have so many collectors obsessed with human organs. Though I have to admit, 6 eyes are truly beautiful, he muttered, touching his eyes with a calm, almost appreciative tone. The custom-made lenses he had once ordered, a perfect replica of skies filled with drifting clouds that extended infinitely into the horizon, had already been stunning. But now, having transformed into the real thing, they were even more breathtaking. Considering how the scarlet eyes had been coveted to the point of genocide, it wasn't surprising that something as striking as 6 eyes would draw attention too. In fact, Seer had always known this day would come. It had just taken a little longer than he expected. He thought someone would have targeted him back in Meteor City. Well then, what should I do now? He mused, smiling as he stared at the webpage content. Chapter 78. Nostrade's Private Mansion. Neon Nostrade, female, 16 years old, the eldest daughter of the Nostrade family, and at the same time, the true backbone of the family. A Mafia fortune teller, she used her Nen ability, angelic auto-writing, to grant her father, Light Nostrade, significant influence within the Mafia. Her ability also helped elevate the Noser family from an obscure organization to one with some standing. Ugh, Daddy broke his promise again. He's probably off with some woman right now, complained the girl with long violet blue hair, pouting in dissatisfaction. Miss Neon, the boss said he'll return a bit later. In the meantime, here's the next fortune-telling request, said Dalzaline, the head bodyguard. A man with bangs, black hair, and 3 black scars, or tear-like marks, under each eye. He spoke with deference. I don't want to. I'm not doing any more fortune-telling. I'm mad. Neon huffed, flipping her hair dramatically, her tone dripping with petulance. Miss Neon, the boss also said that if there's anything you want, he'll make sure to get it for you, Dalzaline relayed, having just heard this from Light Nostrade on the phone, then turning back to appease the irate young lady. Though she was spoiled, Neon was surprisingly easy to please. Really? Then I want this, she exclaimed, her mood instantly brightening as she held up her phone to show Dalzaline a picture. Skoka told me these are the only pair of eyes like this in the entire world. A lot of people are after them, but I want them too. Daddy can definitely get them for me, right? Neon said excitedly. Dalzaline immediately recognized the name Skoka, someone who shared Neon's peculiar hobby. A human collector. Most human collectors had ways of contacting each other and would often showcase their latest acquisitions to one another. Neon Nostrade was also a human collector. Arms, hair, bones, skin. However, she had never collected scarlet eyes, nor had she ever collected a pair of eyes, and certainly not a living specimen. But this pair was the first she had ever expressed an interest in owning. Azure blue eyes, as radiant as gemstones, resembling the boundless sky. Dalzaline recognized those eyes immediately. Over the past few days, they had been a hot topic on the Mafia website, referred to as sky gems. Many people claimed that owning those eyes was akin to possessing a piece of the sky itself, one that could rest in the palm of their hand. The price for those eyes had been climbing steadily, with countless individuals entering private auctions and bounty hunts. However, no one had managed to claim the eyes yet. "You heard her, didn't you?" Dalzaline sighed into the phone, speaking to the boss on the other end of the line. "Whatever Neon wants, make sure she gets it," Light Nostrade commanded. "I understand," Dalzaline nodded. "The boss said he'll make sure you get those eyes," he assured Neon as he turned to her. "Awesome." The girl was easily appeased. Picking up a blank sheet of paper and a pen, she began her fortune-telling. A monstrous, shadow-like figure appeared beside her writing hand, guiding the pen to scrawl line after line of text. During the process, her eyes lost focus, and after the fortune-telling ended, she would neither remember nor look at what she had written. Dalzaline watched the young lady work, his expression somber. It wasn't his first time witnessing Miss Neon in action, but every time he did, he still felt a strange mixture of awe and unease at her unique ability. "All done. Remember to bring me the sky gem," Neon said cheerfully as she put down her pen, swinging her legs innocently like a carefree child. "Yes, miss," Dalzaline responded, picking up the sheet of paper from the floor. The Parasha estate. Marrow stood silently, watching the bloodied figures sprawled on the ground before him, groaning in agony. Blood dripped from his fingers onto the floor. "Marrow, you bastard! How dare you!" Despite being beaten black and blue, the man on the ground still spat insults at him. Without hesitation, an icy blade sliced cleanly across the man's throat. "Father has many children. A few dead won't matter to him," Marrow muttered quietly. "Just like 10 years ago. Father has many children. Losing one illegitimate son doesn't mean anything." Now, he was returning the words they had once thrown at him. Some begged for forgiveness while others wailed apologies. "We're sorry. We were wrong. Please spare us. We're brothers, aren't we?" Their arrogance had vanished entirely. Because their pride never came from their own strength. It had always been rooted in having a powerful father and bearing his family name. When faced with an overwhelming force they could not resist, their lofty attitudes crumbled to dust. The sudden appearance of frosty blades claimed the lives of most, leaving only a few alive, though they were utterly terrified, their faces pale with fear. Marrow didn't continue. He had no intention of slaughtering all his siblings. Given their performance today, their cold-hearted father would surely see them as nothing but worthless failures. Living as discarded members of the family would be a fate far crueler than dying here and now. If he were here, Father would probably say, "I'm still a disappointment." Marrow muttered under his breath, his head lowered. "Master Marrow. The boss is calling for you," a guard stationed outside knocked on the door, his voice audible through it. "I understand." The blonde teenager opened the door from the inside, his expression calm and detached. Ever since returning home, the softness and timidity that once appeared on his face had completely disappeared, replaced by an unyielding coldness. In this way, he resembled his father even more. Marrow pushed open the office door, the same door he had feared approaching as a child. Behind the desk sat his father, Casimir Parasha. The two shared a noticeable resemblance, with their golden hair and piercing green eyes. However, Casimir's slicked back hair and rigid expression made him appear unapproachable and severe. "The person you chose seems to have encountered some trouble," Casimir said, motioning toward the computer beside him. Mero stepped forward to look at the screen. The sight instantly made his blood boil, his face turning red with anger. Those people had put him, Seer, on display as if he were an auction item, even going so far as to openly bid for him. "I'm going to kill them," he growled. The room's temperature plummeted as mist filled the air, icy blades materializing and floating around him. His nen surged uncontrollably. "Do you think he can handle this situation?" Casimir asked coldly. Hearing the question, Mero immediately regained his composure. "They've misjudged completely. No matter how many they send, they'll only meet their deaths. He will kill every last one of them," the golden-haired youth stated with unwavering certainty and calm. "A bunch of fools walking to their doom." "You have a lot of faith in him." Casimir raised an eyebrow, surprised at the change in the son he once dismissed. "You don't understand him, but I do," Mero replied with pride in his voice. Seer's strength, his arrogance, Mero understood them all too well. And that's why he was absolutely certain that those fools would be eradicated, every single one of them. Chapter 79. Seer had been reading through countless posts on the Mafia website, watching as more and more people confidently declared they would get their hands on his eyes and auction them off on September 1st. Every year, on September 1st, gangs from all over the world gathered in Yorknu for the grand annual auction. It was clear these people intended to sell his eyes for a high price. "But why don't you think about your own abilities?" Seer sighed, bored. One by one, they all spoke as if they truly could take his eyes. Even after observing the entire Yorknu area, he hadn't seen any individuals with such vibrant life energy that they would make him fear for his safety. Sure, there were likely troublesome nen abilities out there, but there was no way to prepare for them in advance. "My head hurts." He rubbed his brow, his expression sour. With only a 30% affinity for the six eyes, things were still a bit troublesome. Although his nosebleeds had reduced significantly recently, he still occasionally had them. Initially, all he needed to do was rely on his similar appearance to increase his affinity. Later, behaving in ways that matched the character style and speaking the same lines further boosted the affinity. Now, however, the affinity seemed to have plateaued. The further he went, the harder it became to increase. He couldn't use the same methods or lines a second time. "It's getting dark." He turned and glanced at the large floor-to-ceiling window in his room. Outside, he could vaguely see the neon lights from other buildings. Crack! A crisp sound rang out, and the glass of the window shattered, an object being thrown into the room. In the next moment, the room exploded, turning into a sea of flames. The curtains, bed, and wooden furniture all turned into fuel for the fire. Then, a series of explosions followed, one after another, without any pause. It wasn't just this room, even the adjacent rooms were affected. 5 minutes later, the fire grew stronger. The room remained completely still. The hotel staff didn't come to check, and there was no movement from inside the room. It seemed as if the person inside had already been injured or knocked unconscious. At that moment, sounds came from near the balcony, a rope being tied, followed by climbing noises. Several figures, tied with ropes, entered the room through the broken window. At the same time, the door to the room was kicked open. The two groups collided. The two leaders of the groups exchanged wary looks. Familiar faces? That made them even more cautious. Who didn't know the purpose of appearing here at this moment? They were competitors, each working for different bosses. Whoever finds him first gets the prize. The two leaders negotiated and came to an agreement. Then, they began searching the room. He was sitting at the computer desk just a moment ago. The leader who had entered through the window spoke with a puzzled tone. The computer had been destroyed in the recent explosion, the main unit still emitting smoke. But the person who should have been sitting at the desk was nowhere to be found. Just as the group was about to give up, a figure suddenly appeared from the direction of the balcony. "Looking for me?" The teenager's voice was slightly lifted, carrying a hint of mockery. "How is this possible?" The two groups of people quickly turned toward the source of the voice. Their target, the white-haired boy, was standing on a pile of shattered glass, completely unharmed. Not even a single speck of dirt on his clothes. Meanwhile, they, who had been searching through the fire, were covered in soot and burn marks, looking much more disheveled. It seemed they had underestimated the target's strength. Even such a series of explosions hadn't injured him? Is he even human? You must have already prepared yourselves to die, right? The white-haired, black-tattooed boy looked at them coldly with his sky-blue eyes, a smirk tugging at his lips. The roles of prey and hunter had been reversed. As his words landed, everyone present was sliced in half, upper bodies and lower bodies severed in two. Ah! The cries of pain and despair converged into a chilling, mournful wail. Oh, that was well controlled this time. No intestines spilling out. The boy's voice was filled with malicious amusement. He had split them from the thighs, not the waist this time. After the previous few instances of splitting at the waist, the sight had become somewhat disgusting. What a pity! No piano or other instruments. I could have composed a piece to the rhythm of your screams. Seer looked around, a little regretful. I even have a name for it, Hell's Kitchen, he laughed loudly, clutching his stomach. Unfortunately, none of the others present understood his sense of humor, too focused on their own agonizing wails. They weren't even being supportive. Such a bore. Seer straightened up, his expression tired as he looked at the group. Those who had lost their lower halves were now dragging their upper bodies across the ground, trying to escape the flames and avoid being burned, leaving blood trails on the floor. The marks of smoke, along with the bloodstains, were the most classic of horror elements. "Shut up," Seer coldly warned. "Such noise. A bunch of useless fools." Most of the time, verbal commands alone wouldn't make people listen. So, half of the people present became three pieces, upper body, lower body, and their heads, which rolled off to the side. In that moment, the room finally quieted. The few remaining survivors stared at the white-haired boy with fearful eyes, some of them already resigned to their fate. Without their lower halves, did they even have any reason to live? Even if they miraculously survived, their future would be spent as nothing but useless shells. Seer didn't speak. It seemed he had lost interest in speaking. When he didn't make a sound, no one dared to make a noise either. In such a quiet atmosphere, two more unexpected guests arrived. As if fearing they might miss the treasure if they arrived late, these two groups hurriedly approached. They entered through the open door. However, as soon as they stepped into the room and saw the familiar bodies scattered in the sea of flames, they froze in place. Ah, two more groups arrived. Standing amidst the ruins and blood, the boy, still glaringly white amidst the carnage, raised a hand and greeted them like a cheerful host. "Yo, welcome." Then, like everyone else in the room, they too were cut into two halves. Seer covered his ears early, bracing for yet another round of high-pitched screams. It seemed that when faced with unbearable pain, people instinctively screamed. Did he scream when he was stabbed? He didn't seem to make any sound. So maybe he wasn't in enough pain at the time? "Master," the blonde figure hurriedly rushed into the room. Immediately, he used his ability to extinguish the fire in the room. Ice filled the space where the flames had been, the coolness sweeping away the heat. "You've arrived, Mero. Do you recognize anyone here?" The white-haired boy casually gestured at the figures on the ground. No, Mero shook his head after scanning the faces of the fallen. But I'll make them tell me, he smiled at Seer, making a promise. Chapter 80. Master, please wait in the hallway for a moment, Mero said, dragging an intact chair into the corridor. After wiping it clean, he gestured for the white-haired boy to sit. Good luck. Seer sat down obediently and began rolling up a paper napkin. The bombs hadn't caused him any harm, after all. Back in the Jujutsu world, even a special grade curse spirit could survive a missile strike. With his current strength, handling these small bombs was more than manageable. As for missiles, he hadn't tested those yet, and he wasn't sure about the power of missiles in this world. Still, he wasn't reckless enough to seek out a missile and blow himself up just for the sake of curiosity. Ugh, tired. Stuffing a rolled-up piece of paper napkin into his nose, he slouched back in the chair, his body going limp like a deflated balloon. He almost looked boneless, draping himself over the chair in an exaggerated bridge-like posture. Inside the room, the blonde youth froze the lower halves of all the victims' bodies with ice. You all should know that, if properly preserved, your bodies can still be reattached, he said, throwing out a line of hope for everyone. But whether you'll even have a chance to leave here alive to find someone to stitch you back together depends entirely on your cooperation. His face remained cold as he spoke. Half an hour later, Mero stood up and went to the bathroom to wash the blood off his hands. He looked up at the shattered, half-broken mirror and saw his own reflection. His emerald-green eyes were dark and gloomy, his expression indifferent and cold. It seemed as if he exuded an oppressive aura of shadow and despair, inside and out. Once, even in his dreams, he wouldn't have imagined himself with such an emotionless expression. But this was exactly who he wanted to become. However, in front of Seer, such an expression didn't seem very presentable, did it? He adjusted the muscles of his face, forcing himself to put on a docile smile before stepping out of the room. Stepping over a pile of lifeless corpses, Mero arrived in the hallway. Master, I've gotten the information. They're from Milburn, Congarde, Mormont, and the Nostrade family, he reported, standing beside the white-haired boy. Ah. Never heard of them, Seer replied, sitting up and yawning. He tossed the bloodied napkin away. Milburn, Congarde, and Mormont were unfamiliar names, but Nostrade did ring a bell. That was Neon's family, right? The girl who was a fortune-teller. From his memory, Neon did have a fascination with collecting human body parts. And her useless father, who would do anything to please her, was hardly surprising. They were probably planning to take his eyes as a gift to make Neon happy. It wasn't unexpected, but that didn't mean Seer would allow anyone to treat him as prey. Where are these families located? Seer asked Mero. While he didn't know where they were, as a member of the Mafia, Mero was sure to know. Are we going to confront them directly? Mero asked, his expression barely able to contain his excitement. As expected, I knew Master wouldn't let those self-destructive fools off the hook. Of course. What else? We need to kill a group as a warning, the white-haired boy said lazily. If they keep bothering me, how am I supposed to sleep? Seer muttered, his expression full of irritation. Especially these mafia groups, they always chose to act at night. Late at night, instead of sleeping, was he supposed to entertain them? A bunch of trash like that. Ridiculous. I'll guide you. Oh, and the private airship is already prepared, Mero said excitedly, his voice brimming with admiration. As expected of the master. Even his impatience looked incredibly cool. This was the attitude of a true strongman. Good thing Mero had the foresight to prepare the airship in advance. Well, technically, he borrowed it from his father. Most of these mafia families lived far away, generally outside of York New City. Only a private airship could possibly match the master's status. Not bad, Seer glanced at Mero, feeling increasingly satisfied with his decision to recruit him as a follower. No wonder Sukuna had Yoram by his side, being pampered like this did feel rather nice. It's my duty. Mero's eyes sparkled with joy at the recognition he received. Let's go. Seer stood up and walked out. The private airship was parked on the hotel's rooftop. Seer boarded the airship and paid no attention to its extravagantly luxurious decor. At best, it was far superior to a regular airship and even more opulent than those used by the Hunter Association. Mafia families really were wealthy. He stood by the airship's floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the nightscape outside. Master, which family should we visit first? Mero asked from behind him. The glass faintly reflected their silhouettes. Doesn't matter. Let's start with whoever's closest. Seer sat down on the sofa, crossed his legs, and casually picked up a newspaper lying nearby. The newspaper was filled with articles on finance and politics, likely belonging to the airship's original owner. Then the first one should be the Mormont family, Mero recalled after a moment of thought. All right, let's go there first. Seer nodded. 3 hours later. The Mormont family. Seer stood in the basement of their estate, yawning as he stuffed valuables into storage Curse's mouth. The Mafia truly was wealthy, many of the items in this basement were worth a fortune. If sold, they would easily fetch enough to buy Spear of Heaven. Of course, he didn't touch any of the human organs stored there. Frankly, he found them disgusting. He couldn't understand what was so appealing about a pair of despair-filled crimson eyes floating in liquid inside a transparent jar. In terms of style, weren't the Korta clan's scarlet eyes far more impressive when alive? Their eyes changed color with heightened emotions, far more interesting than a single static shade. If it were up to him, he'd imprison the entire clan and force them to endure pain and despair just to watch their eyes shift between colors. This idea seemed a bit hellish. Maybe even immoral. Seer shook his head, suddenly recalling the system's task, find the 7 greatest beauties, weren't the scarlet eyes one of them? His hand, which had passed over the jar of crimson eyes earlier, now reached back to pick it up. System, come out. Here's one of the 7 beauties you wanted. He shook the jar slightly, calling out in his mind. Ding. One of the 7 beauties, the scarlet eyes, has been found, the system's voice chimed briefly before vanishing again. And? That's it? No rewards? Seer curled his lips in disdain as the jar in his hand disappeared. Ha! A stingy, money-grubbing system. Whatever. He was long used to this pattern. At least the system didn't force him to complete tasks. Most of the time, they ignored each other's existence entirely, which was fine by him. Let's go. After stuffing all the valuable items in the basement into the Curse's mouth, Seer turned to leave. The stairs leading upward were littered with slumped corpses, twisted and broken. Patches of frost lingered on the walls, their icy sheen yet to melt. Corpses and dismembered body parts were scattered everywhere in the once grand mansion. The luxurious private residence was now silent, save for the echo of footsteps, his and Mero's. The heavy stench of blood lingered, carried off into the distance by the night wind. Beneath the moonlight, their airship ascended, flying toward its next destination. Chapter 81. In just one night, 3 Mafia families were completely wiped out. Early in the morning, Light Nostrade received the news. 4 factions had gone out to attack the target last night, but not a single one returned, including those sent by the Nostrade family. Moreover, that same night, 3 of the 4 families, excluding the Nostrades, were massacred entirely. It wasn't until the morning, when the scent of blood carried on the wind reached the outside world, that people discovered the gruesome scenes. The news quickly spread across Mafia websites. Some speculated that this was retaliation from the target, proving that everyone had underestimated the prey's strength. Others felt relieved that they hadn't had time to act yet. There were also claims that someone had seen an airship leaving each of the three families' estates that night. As for how the perpetrator managed to locate all three families so precisely in such a short time, opinions were divided on the forums. Many believed the individual had an insider, someone familiar with the families, implying there was a mole among them. As for why the Nostrade family wasn't targeted in retaliation, Light Nostrade himself had no idea. Frantic, he quickly called his head bodyguard, Dalzaline. "Hurry! The Nostrade family's Sky Gem retrieval mission has failed, get Neon out of there now." His tone was filled with urgency. Neon was his hope, the rope that allowed him to maintain his current position and continue climbing higher. Without Neon, he would be reduced to nothing. "Yes. I'll get the young lady out right away." Dalzaline froze for a moment before responding calmly. But just then, the sound of an airship's propellers turning echoed from outside the window. "Boss. Someone's here," Dalzaline said steadily as he glanced out at the approaching airship. "Hurry. Get Neon out of here. Everyone else doesn't matter. Have them buy time. Just make sure Neon escapes safely, she must not come to harm." Light Nostrade shouted. To ensure the young lady's safety, the bodyguards would have to lay down their lives. That had always been the boss's philosophy. "Understood." Dalzaline turned and ran toward Neon's room, issuing orders to the other bodyguards as he moved. "You guys, go to the entrance and stay on high alert. Don't move. If anyone moves, I'll kill them." A voice rang out suddenly. Dalzaline froze in place, and the others, drenched in cold sweat, stood stiffly. It wasn't that they simply obeyed the command out of fear of the voice, no, it was because an invisible, chilling aura pressed down on them, paralyzing their bodies. Their limbs grew impossibly heavy, leaving them unable to move. In the oppressive silence, the sound of approaching footsteps rang out distinctly. A white-haired, blue-eyed boy walked up to Dalzaline and stood before him, studying his face as though appraising him. Ah, what a surprise, a familiar face. He tilted his head, tapping his chin thoughtfully. "Let me think. Your name's Dalzaline, right? The head bodyguard of Neon Nostrade, who was later killed by the spiders." Dalzaline's body trembled uncontrollably. Channeling his energy into his eyes, he saw an overwhelming force emanating from the boy, an abyssal, dark blue energy. It was sinister, unnatural, yet oddly mesmerizing. It looked as if it were alive, pulsating like a curse. This immense, radiating power was the reason none of them could move. "Come on, give me a smile," Seer said cheerfully, pulling out a camera-like device. He casually draped an arm over Dalzaline's shoulder, forcing him into a hunched position as he pressed the shutter button. Click. The image froze. Dalzaline's forced smile was stiff, and his eyes betrayed his terror. Seer, on the other hand, grinned brightly, exuding a carefree optimism. "Your smile is awful. It looks like I'm threatening you or something," Seer said with a dissatisfied click of his tongue as he examined the photo. "Isn't that exactly what's happening?" Dalzaline screamed inwardly, though he dared not voice his thoughts. "Could you at least tone down your energy? We can barely stand as it is." "Where's Neon?" Seer asked lazily. As expected, he was here for the young lady. Dalzaline pressed his lips together in defiance, refusing to betray his employer. "Even if you won't tell me, I already know where she is," Seer said, his tone light, almost bored. "I'm just asking if she's presentable right now." He stretched his words lazily, as though mocking the situation. A well-bred woman wouldn't want to be seen barefaced, after all. That was something his upbringing had taught him, to always wait patiently for women. Well, the only woman he'd ever waited for was his mother. 2 hours, every time. Annoying, but unavoidable. Dalzaline remained silent, his lips pressed even tighter. "You're no fun," Seer muttered, rolling his eyes. "Like talking to a brick wall." He strode to Neon's room and gave the door a polite knock. "Neon nostrade, are you in there? Please come out, or your bodyguards and maids will all die," he said casually, his tone nonchalant. The door opened. Neon stood there in pink pajamas, staring at the boy in front of her. Most importantly, she saw what she'd been longing for, the boy's brilliant blue eyes. "The sky gem," she murmured, her gaze locked on his eyes. Unfortunately, they were still in a living person's skull. Neon only cared for organs after they were removed. She didn't have a habit of personally harvesting organs from living people. Though, if someone else did it for her, she wouldn't mind. "Young lady." Dalzalin finally broke his silence, his voice full of panic as he tried to stop Neon. If she openly coveted the boy's eyes in front of him, they were all as good as dead. This boy had just wiped out 3 families in one night. And judging by the speed of his airship, it was likely he'd flown straight to them after finishing off the 3rd family. One wrong word, and they'd become the 4th family to be exterminated. "I already know her hobby is collecting human body parts," Seer said with a chuckle, cutting through the tension with an air of indifference. "And that she wants my eyes. There's no point in hiding it." He laughed lightly, almost playfully. "To be fair, my eyes are quite beautiful, aren't they?" There was even a trace of smug approval in his tone, as though he appreciated their taste. "Honestly, I'm pretty lenient with people I know," Seer added with a sigh, shaking his head in mock exasperation. "Help me with a reading, will you? Use your ability, angelic auto-writing," he said, fixing his gaze on Neon. Neon glanced at Seer, then at the frozen bodyguards and maids around her. Dalzalin stammered, trying to speak, but his voice faltered. "Quiet." The white-haired boy, Seer, cast a casual glance at Dalzalin. An invisible pressure suddenly intensified, forcing Dalzalin to his knees. Neon's eyes sparkled with excitement. Someone her father's head bodyguard couldn't defy. Other than her dad, this was a first. "If that's the case, I'll help you with the reading. But you have to agree to one condition," Neon said eagerly. "Oh no. The young lady is about to make another one of her unreasonable demands," Dalzalin thought anxiously, but he dared not speak. "Take me to an amusement park. Dad always says he'll take me, but then every time he promises, he just says, 'Next time.'" Neon pouted, her voice filled with indignation. Whenever she went out, there were always bodyguards following her, and they never let her go to crowded places. It was so boring. "That's lame," Seer muttered, his expression flattening as he frowned. He didn't want to agree. An amusement park? Such a childish place. The fact that Neon even brought it up was ridiculous. Suddenly, the system chimed in. Ding. Valentine's Day limited time mission released. Have a doki doki date with the person next to you and turn her into your fangirl. Rewards will be issued based on mission completion. Valentine's Day mission? Oh, right, it's February, Seer realized. The mission's style perfectly matched this fun-loving system. He'd almost forgotten that its slogan was bringing a little spice to life. Turning someone into a fangirl. Does it mean like Miwa? Gojo and Sukuna both had fangirls, so Seer deserves one too. Wait. Does the Hunter x Hunter world even have Valentine's Day? And the mission only says the person next to you. It doesn't have to be Neon, right? Any girl would do. Seer glanced at Mero, then at Neon's team of bodyguards and maids. First, eliminate the men. No matter how you look at it, two guys going to an amusement park together would be weird. Plus, the mission specifies a fangirl. As for the maids, forget it. Neon it is. At least she's a named character. Chapter 82. In short, That's the situation. The young lady wants to go to the amusement park with him. Dalzaling muttered into the phone, sighing helplessly as he leaned into a corner. Being caught between this father-daughter pair was giving him a headache. You can't stop him either? Light Nostrade asked, his voice tense. I'm completely powerless in front of him, Dalzaling admitted stiffly. Even without making a move, the oppressive aura Seer released was enough to utterly suppress him. I understand. For now, keep things stable until I get there, Light Nostrade instructed, sounding equally strained. Dalzaling, what did Dad say? Neon urged impatiently. The boss wishes you a pleasant outing, Dalzaling replied, forcing a rigid smile. Everyone present, except Neon, could tell he didn't mean a word of it. Great. Neon cheered, spinning happily in place. I'm going to change clothes. With that, she darted back to her room. Please don't hurt the young lady, Dalzaling pleaded as he turned to face the white-haired boy. As for Nostrade's actions against you, we're willing to compensate. Compensate? How much are we talking? Seer asked, blinking slowly, his tone lazy. 10 billion, Dalzaling gritted out. Is Nostrade really that rich? Seer turned to glance at Marrow. Light Nostrade is currently one of the higher-ups in the underworld, second only to the 10 Dons, Marrow quickly explained. Oh. A high-ranking member, huh? 10 billion seems a bit low, doesn't it? Seer said with a sly smile, his intentions to push for more blatantly obvious. 20 billion. That's the most liquid capital we can gather, Dalzaling admitted, his fist clenching and relaxing repeatedly. Great. Transfer it to this card. Seer handed Dalzaling a card, grinning brightly as Dalzaling memorized the account number. Don't worry. As soon as the money comes through, your young lady and I will be the best of friends, Seer said cheerfully, patting Dalzaling on the shoulder in an exaggeratedly reassuring manner. Dalzaling hesitated, then turned away to call his boss, urging him to send the money quickly. By the time Neon emerged in her new outfit, the 20 billion had already arrived. System, purchase inverted spear of heaven. In an instant, a weapon appeared in Seer's hand. It was short, about the length of an arm, not particularly sharp, and its shape was unusual. This was the anti-ability cursed tool designed to disrupt techniques. According to the system, it had been modified to work in all worlds. So, it should be able to interrupt abilities fueled by Nen too, right? Seer waved the weapon experimentally, finding its odd shape somewhat fascinating. Even if he didn't necessarily need it, it was better to have it. The hoarder instinct kicked in once again. Let's go. Neon, now fully dressed, stood before the white-haired boy. The two were about the same height, neither looking down nor up at the other. Fine. Escort her to the amusement park, complete the time-limited mission, and collect the reward. Hopefully, the miserly system wouldn't skimp on the prize this time. Let's take the airship, Seer said, motioning toward the nearby vehicle. My lord. Marrow, who had hurried over, looked utterly bewildered, his lips trembling as if trying to form words. In the end, he simply lowered his head in frustration. Unbelievable. The Lord was really going to accompany this woman to an amusement park. What was so special about this organ-collecting maniac that she deserved his attention? But Marrow couldn't advise Seer. In the end, he could only glare resentfully at the woman as she boarded the airship, along with her bodyguards, which he had specially prepared for Seer. After this, Marrow swore to replace every single piece of furniture in the airship, carpets, sofas, everything. It all had to go. Why is that guy staring at me? Neon asked loudly, pointing blatantly toward the corner. The spoiled young lady didn't bother with subtlety. Seer followed her gaze, and Marrow immediately lowered his head, looking like a moldy mushroom emitting a sinister aura in the shadows. Just ignore him, Seer said with a shrug, not bothering to explain further. After all, Mero could be described as his toxic stan. Anyone who got close to Seer would receive the same death glare from him, though Mero probably thought he was hiding it well. If this were the entertainment industry and Seer were a celebrity, Mero would be the kind of fan people worried about, likely to poison rival stars or throw acid on their fans. This guy was getting darker by the day. York New City's most luxurious commercial district also boasted the largest amusement park. Neon, like a child visiting for the first time, dashed excitedly from one attraction to another. "Let's ride the carousel. Dalzaline, take our picture," she said, running toward the line for the carousel. She then looked back with an expectant gaze at the white-haired boy, who remained still and expressionless. Lord Seer doesn't like childish attractions like this. Mero stepped forward, loudly accusing Neon of being clueless about Seer's preferences. "How do you know he doesn't like it?" Neon retorted, glaring at Mero. Mero froze, unable to reply. "You can't be certain either, right?" Neon said smugly, as though she'd won a major argument. She stepped closer to the white-haired boy, cautiously reaching out to grab one of his fingers. Seer lowered his blue eyes to her hand, seemingly observing it. He said nothing and made no move to stop her. "Come on, let's go play, okay?" Neon coaxed, shaking his hand in a playful, pleading manner. Under her gaze, Seer remained silent but allowed himself to be led toward the carousel. He didn't smile, nor did he resist. To Neon, that meant he'd agreed. The youthful, vibrant girl and the exquisitely beautiful boy were a perfect match for the colorful, dreamlike ride. "Dalzaline, take our picture," Neon called out with a bright smile as she sat on a carousel horse, waving at him below. "You know my name, but I don't know yours. What's your name?" she asked after posing for the photo, turning to the quiet boy beside her. "Seer DeVille." The boy lifted his icy blue eyes to glance at her before looking away again. Under his gaze, Neon felt her heart skip a beat. It wasn't until he looked away that she finally snapped back to reality. Those were truly uniquely beautiful eyes. Dalzaline led the team of bodyguards, keeping a vigilant watch over the surroundings. As soon as the carousel ride ended, Neon eagerly jumped off and grabbed the white-haired boy's hand, pulling him toward other attractions. "What kind of rides do you like? Something thrilling? Let's try that one." She excitedly pointed to the tallest attraction in the amusement park. The bungee jump. The one infamous for only replacing its safety measures after someone dies. Among all the rides, the screams coming from there were the loudest. Hearing the terrified screams, Neon's expression grew even more excited. The white-haired boy seemed to smile faintly and said, "Sure." 10 minutes later. Amidst the echoing screams around them, Neon's eyes sparkled even brighter. She turned happily to look at the boy sitting beside her. The white-haired boy remained composed, his demeanor completely unshaken. His complexion stayed pale, with no sign of a flush from adrenaline or fear. In contrast, Neon's face had turned red, whether from the thrill of the ride or something else, she wasn't sure. "I've never been on a roller coaster either," she said, pulling him toward the next attraction. As the roller coaster started, she sat beside him, observing his calm, steady posture. However, his hair, unlike his expression, was blown straight up by the wind, sticking out like a hedgehog. She couldn't help but laugh, earning a curious glance from the boy. Next was the haunted house. In the pitch-black darkness, an NPC suddenly jumped out, catching Neon off guard. Startled, she instinctively leaned toward the boy beside her for protection. But a pair of cold hands firmly pressed down on her shoulders and pushed her back into the center of the bodyguard group. "Do your job," the boy said calmly, his voice cold and indifferent yet somehow reassuring. "Miss Neon, are you all right?" Dalzaline asked with concern. "I'm fine." Neon shook her head. To Neon, this was a Doki Doki amusement park experience. As for Seer, he barely said a word. Chapter 83. As they passed a tent labeled fortune-telling, Neon stared at it curiously for a long moment. "Let's get a fortune reading," she said, pointing at the tent. Her Nen ability allowed her to predict the future for others, but she couldn't use it on herself. The white-haired boy didn't protest as she eagerly dragged him into the tent. Inside, the tent was cluttered with all sorts of props. Behind a simple table sat a woman cloaked in black, with a crystal ball resting atop the table. "She's actually using a crystal ball for fortune-telling," Neon exclaimed in amazement. It looked much fancier than her own ability, she thought. Dalzaline, following behind them, hesitated to speak. "Miss Neon, is it possible that, unlike you, she's just a fraud? Can you tell me about my future?" Neon asked as she sat down. The white-haired boy casually lounged in a nearby chair, leaning back, crossing his legs, and half-closing his eyes as he studied the so-called fortune-teller. The fortune-teller stretched out her hands, rubbing the crystal ball theatrically. After a moment, she stared intently into the ball, as if seeing something. "Young lady, your future love life will be full of challenges," the woman said with a troubled expression. "You're lying." Neon slammed her hands on the table, jumping up from her seat. "That's not how fortune-telling works. You're a fraud." "How can you call me a fraud?" The woman clutched the crystal ball, clearly displeased. "All right, Miss Neon," Dalzaline intervened, gently holding her back. "The fortune-tellers at amusement parks are just here to entertain guests. It's all fake, it's just part of the attractions." Neon Nostrade was a natural-born Nen user. Ever since her ability was discovered, her father, Light Nostrade, had kept her under tight protection. Protection? It was more like confinement and surveillance. As a result, despite her age, Neon lacked much basic common sense and still behaved like a child. "So, it's all fake," Neon muttered, grabbing the white-haired boy's hand. "Let's go. When we're done here, I'll give you a real fortune-telling." "I'm an actual fortune-teller," she said with a tone of proud boastfulness. "All right, I'll look forward to it," the white-haired boy replied with a rare, obvious smile. There was a hint of amusement in his expression, though Neon didn't notice. "For the last ride. Let's do the Ferris wheel," she said, pointing to the slow-turning wheel in the distance. "You can even have a meal on it." She was clearly excited about the idea of dining on the Ferris wheel, her tone brimming with enthusiasm. "Then let's go," the white-haired boy said casually. Neon eagerly pulled him toward the Ferris wheel. Dalzaline and the team of bodyguards tried to follow them inside, but Neon stopped them. "No way, you guys can take the next one. Too many people in here will ruin it," she said, pointing to the Ferris wheel behind them. "But, Miss Neon." Dalzaline looked conflicted. They were supposed to stick to her like glue, protecting her at all costs. "What's the big deal? Seer is stronger than all of you anyway. With him here, there's nothing to worry about," Neon said matter-of-factly, holding the boy's hand. She didn't care how much her comment might hurt Dalzaline and the other bodyguards. Dalzaline turned to the white-haired boy, who stood there lazily, his expression indifferent as he cast them an uninterested glance. "Let's go have fun," Neon said, pulling Seer along and leaving Dalzaline and the others outside. "Damn it," Mero muttered as he stood outside, watching the Ferris wheel begin to turn. His face twisted with jealousy and frustration. He stood there, glaring at the Ferris wheel as it rose higher and higher. "I've never even had the chance to ride a Ferris wheel with Lord Seer. Damn it." Beside him, Dalzaline sighed, his expression helpless. It seemed Miss Neon had started to disdain them. Their gazes met, and for a brief moment, Dalzaline and Mero glared at each other with mutual hatred. "It's all your master's fault." Inside the Ferris wheel, as it climbed higher, Neon leaned against the window, peering down at the amusement park below. She caught sight of Dalzaline and the others standing on the ground. "This is the first time Dalzaline and the others haven't followed me," she said, her tone brimming with delight. "It's all because of you. If it weren't for you, my dad would never have agreed to let me come out to play." She turned to Seer, her happiness written all over her face. "That's because they're worried I'll kill you all," Seer thought to himself, his mind calm and detached. "Still, for 20 billion, we can coexist peacefully." He lowered his gaze to the crowds of tourists milling around the amusement park below, his expression unreadable. "Next time, I want to come out and play with you again," Neon began, but before she could finish her sentence, the Ferris wheel suddenly shuddered. The entire structure tilted sharply, sending a wave of unease through the air. A deafening explosion rang out from below, followed by panicked screams as the crowd scattered in terror. "Lord Seer," Marrow shouted, his reflexes taking over as he reached toward the Ferris wheel that now leaned dangerously. In an instant, cold, glimmering ice began creeping upward from the Ferris wheel's base, freezing it in place and halting its collapse. At the same time, a convoy of dozens of black cars sped into the amusement park. Over 100 men in black suits poured out of the vehicles, immediately pulling out guns and firing indiscriminately at the crowd. "Damn it!" Marul muttered, one hand steadying the frozen Ferris wheel while the other summoned blocks of ice around himself to serve as shields against the incoming bullets. "I'll never forgive these bastards for ruining Lord Seer's day," he thought bitterly. The ice shields shattered repeatedly under the gunfire, but new ones continued to form. Occasionally, frosted blades of ice materialized and lashed out, striking at the gunmen in black suits. If Marrow's abilities faltered, he knew the bullets would tear him apart. "Lord Seer." Marrow gritted his teeth, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the Ferris wheel. "More ice, now." Dalzaline barked. "Damn it. If it weren't for Lord Seer, I wouldn't care about your lives at all," Marrow thought furiously as he reinforced the shields for the others. Dalzaline, using the cover of Marrow's ice shields, directed the bodyguards to draw their weapons and fire back at the attackers. What had once been a joyful amusement park now turned into a battlefield for a gang war. "They're up there," someone shouted, pointing at the Ferris wheel. Suddenly, someone on the ground shouted, drawing the attention of everyone below to the sky above. The white-haired boy stood midair, holding the purple-blue-haired girl in his arms. From above, he looked down on the chaotic battlefield below, as if watching a boring play unfold. "Kill those two," someone yelled, hefting what looked like a rocket launcher and firing it at the pair in the sky. The missile shot forward with blazing sparks and trailing smoke. Neon turned her head away, squeezing her eyes shut in terror. "The power is decent, but you'd need to actually hit your target for it to matter," the white-haired boy remarked. Despite carrying someone, his movements were effortless as he dodged every missile. Wherever he passed, the lives of those below were snuffed out one after another. When Neon dared to open her eyes again, she found herself unharmed, still gliding through the sky. The missiles, though ferocious and dangerous, failed even to graze them. Which faction sent these people this time? This is so boring. She heard the boy's voice, cold and uninterested. Instinctively, she looked into his eyes. Those cerulean blue eyes were as calm and breathtaking as ever. Below them, the Ferris wheel remained frozen in its crooked posture, held in place by layers of frost. The ground was covered with countless shards of reflective ice, glinting like mirrors in the chaos. Gunfire and explosions filled the air with unrelenting noise. The wind rushing past them carried the acrid stench of smoke and blood. Thump thump. Thump thump. Neon could hear her own heartbeat, pounding louder and faster with every passing second. She felt as though her heart had never raced this fast in her life. "Congratulations, host. You have successfully completed the Doki Doki timed mission 100%. Congratulations, host. Character compatibility has increased. Current compatibility with Gojo Satoru, 40%. Current compatibility with Sukuna, 40%. Chapter 84. Who sent you? The blond young man pressed an ice blade to the throat of the last surviving enemy, his tone cold and hard. His back was turned toward Seer and the others, his expression dark and brooding. Watching Seer ride the Ferris wheel with that nostrade girl had already infuriated him, and now these fools had the audacity to interrupt. They all deserved to die. Leave it to us. Dalzalin stepped forward, looking as if he had dealt with such situations countless times before. Mero stared at the enemy for a long moment, but the ice blade in his hand remained steady. Until. That's enough. Hand them over, the white-haired boy spoke lazily. Only then did Mero tear his intense gaze away from Dalzalin and lower his weapon. It feels like we've been killing a lot of gang members recently, Seer sighed, though his tone was casual and unconcerned. Which gangs were collaborating with Meteor City again? Among the people he had killed, were there any from those groups? If so, Pampas would have a massive headache. What a pity Seer couldn't see the man's expression. Dalzalin dragged the last remaining captive to stand behind Neon. Miss, the boss has ordered you to return home, he said, looking at her. Having narrowly escaped danger, Neon understood she needed to leave. This wasn't the first time she'd been attacked, but it was undoubtedly the most violent one yet, both in numbers and firepower. All right, I understand, she replied, surprisingly obedient for once. Come home with me, Seer, she said, her large, round eyes full of hope as she gazed at the white-haired boy. Her turquoise-blue eyes, caught somewhere between blue and green, stared at him unblinkingly. Seer stood there quietly, raising an eyebrow at her request but offering no response. Seeing that he didn't immediately agree, Neon tried again. I don't have paper or a pen on me, but there's plenty at home. Once we're back, I can do your fortune-telling. She instinctively placed her hand over her chest, feeling her heart gradually returning to a normal rhythm. But the memory of its earlier violent pounding was still vivid in her mind. Let's go, Seer said with a nod. Dalzalin dragged the captive onto the airship. Mero glared at the sight, his jaw tightening so hard it seemed he might crack his teeth. How could they bring filth onto the airship he had prepared for Seer? Damn nostrade family. None of them should even be allowed aboard. Let's go, Mero, Seer called out, snapping the frozen figure out of his twisted thoughts. Honestly, the nostrade family should probably avoid eating anything on this airship. At this point, Mero looked like he was genuinely considering poisoning the food. You hardcore loyalists are something else. Coming. Mero quickly jogged after them and boarded the airship. The amusement park was left in shambles. Shell casings, blood, and severed limbs littered the ground, creating a scene straight out of hell. But amidst the carnage, the lingering frost added a surreal, fairy tale-like quality. What had once been an ordinary amusement park now looked like a haunted theme park straight out of a horror story. As the airship lifted off, cracks began to spread across the ice encasing the Ferris wheel. One after another, shards of ice fell to the ground with a sharp crack. Finally, the already tilting Ferris wheel collapsed entirely, crashing to the ground with a deafening thud and sending up a cloud of dust. Nostrade Mansion. Light Nostrade still hadn't shown up, as he was rushing back to the mansion. All further instructions were relayed to Dalzalin via phone. The man took the captive to the basement, likely to extract some information. Meanwhile, Neon led Seer and Mero to her room. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and handed it to Seer. Just write your name, blood type, and birth date on it, she said, sitting on her bed. Can I use a fake name? Seer wondered, considering his options before scribbling down the alias he used, along with the rest of the requested information. He handed the paper back to Neon. The moment Neon took the paper and picked up a pen, her eyes lost their light. Though she faced the paper, she couldn't see the words she was writing. Near her hand appeared a strange, otherworldly figure. Less than a minute later, Neon returned to her normal state and handed the paper to the white-haired boy sitting across from her. "Here, it's done," she said naturally, her tone carrying a hint of pride, like a child showing off a talent. Everyone said her fortune-telling was 100% accurate. She was a born diviner. "Wow, that was fast," Seer said as he took the paper and glanced at it. What he saw was a dense, shadowy gray, like a deep fog. The result wasn't all that surprising. For someone who had transmigrated into this world and carried a system, most prophecy-related abilities didn't work on them. After all, travelers were often considered entities outside the world's framework, capable of altering the destinies of others. "Alright, why don't you do a reading for Mero too?" Seer folded the paper and looked at Neon. Neon's expression faltered. She glanced at Mero, clearly reluctant. She didn't seem fond of him and wasn't eager to perform a reading for him. But since Seer had asked, she begrudgingly agreed. "Fine, if you say so," she muttered, handing a blank sheet of paper to Mero. Mero wasn't keen on being read by her either. But because it was Seer's request, he had no choice but to comply. Gripping the pen tightly, he scribbled his information onto the paper, pressing so hard that he nearly tore through it. Neon Nostrade's ability was well known among the Mafia, and Light Nostrade's rise to power was largely attributed to it. Many mocked him for relying on his daughter's talent. Mero had heard plenty of rumors about the Nostrade family. Even his father had been one of Neon's clients. But Mero had never once considered seeking her out for a reading. He didn't believe in fate. "Alright, here you go," Neon said, quickly finishing her work and handing the paper back to Mero. "You walk amidst the fog. Remember to follow the lighthouse ahead. If you stand still for too long, you'll lose the path beneath your feet forever." Seer glanced at the message but found nothing particularly useful in it. Prophecies. They're always cryptic riddles. I hate riddles. The lighthouse. I see. I understand now, Mero exclaimed, his tone suddenly filled with excitement and resolve. His attitude toward Neon's fortune-telling shifted instantly from disdain to complete trust. "What exactly did you understand?" "Never mind." With the payment received and the fortune-telling done, it was time to leave. "All right, we're heading out," Seer said, standing up to go. "Leaving already?" Neon looked a little disappointed. "Come play with me next time," she said eagerly. Dalzaline, who had just arrived, almost stumbled at those words, nearly doing a full split on the spot. "No, no, no. Don't come back. The young lady has no idea how terrifying his presence is." Even the boss was on edge the whole time. "Sure," Seer replied with a small nod. "As long as your dad remembers to prepare my 20 billion appearance fee, that is." As they walked down the corridors of the Nostrade estate, a new painting had been hung on the wall. It depicted a distorted, three-dimensional humanoid figure, encased in a frame. It wasn't an industrially manufactured model but a real human. There was no way this was something Dalzaline had done on his own, it must have been approved by someone else. Hanging such a painting in the hallway. Light Nostrade had quite the eccentric taste. Perhaps Neon's peculiar hobby of collecting human organs was, to some extent, a family trait. Chapter 85. Due to certain circumstances, Seer's original suite at the Palatia Hotel was temporarily uninhabitable, forcing him to move down one floor. Although the top floor had nearly been reduced to ruins, the lower floors remained completely untouched, as if nothing had happened. After several days of relentless killing and 3 or 4 sleepless nights, Seer finally managed to get some proper rest. By the time he woke up, it was already noon the next day. "Hungry? I think it's been 2 or 3 days since I last ate," he mumbled quietly, half sitting, half leaning on the bed. Although he hadn't felt it before, the hunger hit him hard after waking up. He reached for the phone on the bedside table and called the front desk, instructing them to bring up some food. When a knock sounded at the door, he threw on a shirt and went to open it. The moment the door opened, Mero entered the room, pushing a food cart and greeting respectfully, "My lord, please enjoy your meal." Mero had stood guard outside Seer's room for as long as Seer slept, and the moment he saw someone delivering food, he immediately took over the task. Seer sat down on the sofa and buttoned his shirt. It was a V-neck shirt that revealed a good portion of his chest, even when fully buttoned, and the gravity rings on his wrists looked like stylish accessories. As someone with millions of social media followers, Seer always stayed on top of fashion trends. Is this the York New Daily? Seer glanced at a newspaper tucked under the dining tray while eating. Mero lowered his head to look at it too, and whatever he saw made his expression twist in anger. Those bastards. They'll write anything for the sake of headlines. Seer picked up the newspaper and unfolded it. In bold black letters, the headline read, "Nostrade heiress spotted with mysterious boy on an outing, Palisha heir serving as an attendant." The main article was just as sensational as the headline suggested. Yesterday, one of our staff members went to the amusement park for a leisurely day out and happened to spot a group of extremely attractive visitors. Upon closer inspection, they recognized a few familiar faces among the group. Attached are photos. The three individuals circled in the images are none other than the Nostrade family's heiress, a young master from the Palisha family, and the Nostrade family's head of security. Surely everyone reading the York New Daily is familiar with the Nostrade and Palisha surnames, right? Of course, the real focus isn't on them. It's on the white-haired boy circled in the picture. Yesterday, the Palisha young master followed him around like an obedient servant. This raises the question, just who is this mysterious figure? Our staff couldn't uncover the boy's identity, but you've all heard about the gang clash at the amusement park yesterday, right? The scene was reportedly so gruesome that some onlookers vomited from sheer disgust. And the one responsible? None other than the white-haired boy. Attached image, the white-haired boy holding a girl with long purple-blue hair, standing midair. After conducting some investigation, we discovered that this boy is quite infamous on certain underground gang forums. His eyes, in particular, have fetched a sky-high price of 10 billion on the black market. This surpasses even the current bidding price for the Scarlet Eyes. It is rumored that it's one of the mysterious 8 wonders of the world. Attached image, Azure Eyes. Many have already paid with their lives trying to claim those eyes. Do you think they're worth it? PFFT. Ha 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 ha. Seer burst into uncontrollable laughter. That headline, it had a certain tabloid flavor to it. But I don't even get a name in the article, huh? He muttered, clearly displeased. Throughout the piece, only Neon's and Mero's names were mentioned. Seer himself was simply referred to as the mysterious boy. 8th wonder of the world. Well deserved, Seer nodded in satisfaction. With his 6-eye striking appearance and unparalleled attributes, if they didn't make it onto the list of world-renowned beauties, he'd seriously question this world's taste. Mero, on the other hand, looked grim as he asked, "My lord, do you think we need to investigate the identities of the people from the amusement park yesterday?" Seer, now full from his meal, leaned lazily back on the sofa and replied nonchalantly, "No need. It was obvious those people were targeting me and Neon together, not just me. Leave it to the Nostrade family to deal with. What benefit would we gain from cleaning up their mess?" He wasn't bloodthirsty, nor was he interested in being someone else's hired blade. As for those specifically coming for him, if they dared to come again, he'd deal with them as they came. It's like I've somehow become the public enemy of Yorknu. Seer mused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. If this were a game, he'd probably have unlocked that title by now, a legendary one, no less. After all, he started killing on his very first day in Yorknu, and over the next few days, every group that came for him met their end. He wasn't even sure which factions hadn't yet lost members to him. "Oh, it's not like that, my lord. It's just some short-sighted fools throwing their lives away," Mero replied without missing a beat. "But this whole eighth wonder of the world thing. That could be a problem," Seer sighed. Hadn't anyone learned from the Scarlet Eyes case? That clan was wiped out entirely. And his unique eyes? They'd probably draw even worse trouble. The more people who wanted his eyes, the more he'd have to kill. It wouldn't just be random individuals anymore, if the top brass got involved. He might actually earn the title of world enemy. Even the Hunter Association listens to some higher people, don't they? "I didn't sign up to be some apocalyptic villain," Seer lamented, though the expression on his face was one of lively amusement. He was genuinely someone who grew up with a strong moral foundation, always taught to be kind to others. "My lord, do you find this newspaper troublesome?" Mero asked. "Just a little," Seer said, holding his fingers slightly apart to illustrate. "Understood. I'll arrange for this issue to be recalled and destroyed," Mero replied calmly. The Yorknu Daily was a local paper, and with the Palisha family's influence in the city, it wouldn't take more than a day for those newspapers to disappear entirely. Soon, the stories of the so-called white-haired boy would become one of Yorknu's unspoken secrets. "Then I'll leave it to you. You're quite handy, Mero," Seer said, standing up and giving Mero an approving pat on the shoulder. Buoyed by the praise, Mero's determination visibly increased. He left the hotel in a rush, eager to get the task done. Now that Seer had some peace, he turned his attention to the notifications from his system. Curse Technique Reversal, Red. A skill of Gojo Satoru's. If blue represents attraction or gravity, then red represents repulsion. At equal output, red is at least twice as powerful as blue. Cleave. A skill of Sukuna. If dismantle is an ordinary slash, cleave adjusts its strength based on the target's power, delivering a lethal strike. These were just Seer's observations before his death. Who knows if that certain mangaka hasn't reckoned their abilities by now? "I've really poured all my points into attack skills, huh?" Seer sighed after analyzing his current abilities. His stats were basically maxed out attack, mid to high defense, and mid to high mana reserves. Chapter 86. Palisha Estate. If you don't want the entire Yorknu Mafia wiped out, you'd better have this morning's batch of Yorknu Daily recalled immediately and issue a gag order, said the blonde youth standing firmly in front of his father's desk, unyielding in his stance. Kazuma sat steadily in his chair, staring at his son. Recalling his reaction upon seeing the newspaper's headline and contents earlier that morning, he found himself momentarily speechless. Serving by his side, huh? Kazuma thought bitterly. Yorknu Daily might as well have outright claimed that his son was that boy's dog. As a senior figure in the Mafia Association, Kazuma had never imagined the name Palisha could ever be associated with servitude to anyone, let alone reduced to such humiliation. Disgraceful. Truly disgraceful. Before you even got here, someone had already taken care of it, Kazuma finally said, his voice calm and composed. A man of his age, still retaining his charm thanks to his power and status, didn't even need to lift a finger for such matters to be resolved. It's already been handled? Mero froze for a moment before his face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Something he was supposed to handle for his lord had been snatched away by someone else. Who dared to take the initiative before him? The people from Meteor City reached an agreement with the Mafia Association. No one in the Mafia is allowed to pursue that boy any further. Of course, if I were to analyze the situation, it's largely because the Mafia was intimidated by his strength. Some even went as far as consulting the Nostrate family's heiress for divination. The results. Kazmu smirked disdainfully. The high-ranking members of the Mafia Association had seen the divination slips, and every single one of them spelled out the same conclusion: death. The message was crystal clear: opposing him meant certain death. With these factors combined, the Mafia factions that had previously acted against him unanimously agreed to ceasefire. This morning's batch of Yorknew Daily would be recalled, and even those Mafia members who had lost subordinates to him would be forced to keep their mouths shut. Anyone who comes out of Meteor City and causes such a stir. Their strength is never to be underestimated, Kazmu remarked, a hint of admiration slipping into his voice. My lord comes from Meteor City? Mero exclaimed, utterly stunned. He couldn't believe it. Wasn't that place the world's largest garbage dump? It had to be lies. His lord's homeland had to be a good place. Meteor City. You just can't underestimate those born there, that's all, Kazmu said, waving off the topic as if he didn't want to discuss Meteor City any further. My lord must have been the strongest in Meteor City, Mero declared with unwavering conviction. That's not necessarily true. Anyway, that's enough. You can leave now, Kazmu said, his tone ambiguous as he gestured for Mero to leave. Even though his son had finally started resembling his younger self in some ways, the more he looked at him now, the more irritating he found him. Back when Kazmu was young, he'd never stoop so low as to serve someone else. And now, his own son not only humiliated the family name but even took his private airship to curry favor with someone. Disgraceful. An utter embarrassment. A useless wastrel. Get out of here, and don't bother coming back if you've got nothing important to do. Kazmu waved dismissively, his expression brimming with disdain as he signaled he couldn't bear to look at Mero for even one more second. The son, knowing that Palish's influence was no longer needed, left without so much as a glance back. His indifference made it clear he felt no attachment to the estate. Meanwhile, Seer was browsing the system marketplace. At this moment, he was the picture of wealth and luxury. The collections he'd looted from the three families had already been sold. Fortunately, they were all rare, high-value items that were easy to sell. The profits had caused his balance to skyrocket, bringing his total to 60 billion. Since there wasn't much use for hoarding money, Seer figured he might as well convert it into something practical. Item name: Prison Realm. Effect: can seal anything in the world. Though powerful, it comes with limitations. It requires 1 minute to activate and can only seal objects within a 4-meter radius. Price: 30 billion. Description: a tool capable of sealing even the Honored One. It's even more expensive than the inverted Spear of Heaven. Seer muttered. Well, that made sense. After all, the inverted Spear of Heaven only managed to take Satoru Gojo's first blood and didn't keep him down for long. In contrast, the prison realm had trapped him for over half a month. If not for the angel technique, Satoru might have stayed sealed even longer. Seer hesitated briefly but decided to make the purchase anyway. Even if he didn't end up using it, he had the money to spare. Once he bought the prison realm, the system marketplace went entirely blank, completely devoid of items. System, are you already drained dry? Seer stared at the empty screen and couldn't resist mocking it. Useless thing. System response: insufficient energy. Items have reached the world's limit. Seer immediately grasped the implication: smuggling items into this world consumed energy. The system was already running on fumes and was saving up energy for another jump between worlds. Wait a minute. So the system had no energy left but still opened the marketplace to sell him things? Calling it a merchant system really wasn't far off the mark. The prison realm was a perfectly square cube resembling a cube. Its surface was dotted with numerous closed eyes, making it impossible to discern its true nature based on appearance alone. Even if the eyes were open, it wouldn't matter. Considering how many people in the hunter world proudly collected eyeballs as trophies, the prison realm didn't seem odd in the slightest by comparison. For now, you're not needed. Just stay with the inverted spear of heaven. Seer casually shoved the prison realm into the storage curse's mouth. At that moment, his phone began to ring. The caller ID displayed the name, Pampas. Seer raised an eyebrow. Pampas was calling him? That was unusual. Answering the call, Seer heard Pampas's voice on the other end. "We know what you've been up to in Yorknu. There are gangs looking into Seer DeVille's origins, and since your identity was provided by the gangs, the fact that you're from Meteor City has already been exposed. No surprises there." And then? Seer's tone was calm, his laziness evident in his lack of concern. "The gangs have reached a consensus with Meteor City not to act against you. For now, don't target the gangs either," Pampas chuckled lightly. That "for now" carried a lot of weight. For now, don't act. Later, who knows? For now, allies. Later, maybe not. The relationship between Meteor City and the gangs was indeed complicated. "Anything else?" Seer asked, yawning as if bored. "I didn't think this day would come so soon, but since you stirred up such a storm, I have no choice but to bring it forward," Pampas muttered, flipping through a small notebook as he spoke. "You're technically a part of Meteor City, right? And, reluctantly, one of District 12's leaders too, yes. Now that you're flush with cash." Pampas cleared his throat. In his notebook, pages were filled with names, characteristics, and future plans for various individuals. It also meticulously recorded contributions, like how much someone had donated in Jenny or resources. Seer smirked. He knew Pampas wouldn't call without an agenda. The guy had invested in so many people, it wouldn't be surprising if he frequently called them up to ask for money. If Pampas had asked for money a few days ago, Seer would have refused outright. But now. Seer glanced at his balance. "How much do you need?" "Would 20 billion do?" Pampas asked. "Fine. I'll keep 10 billion for myself." Seer smirked. Pampas should realize how lucky he'd been to have had the chance to invest in him back then. He'd gotten in on the deal of a lifetime. Besides, as someone from a kind-hearted and generous background, Seer truly was inclined to help others and donate to worthy causes. Chapter 87. Pampas, who was merely in the habit of asking for handouts, never expected Seer to give him such a massive surprise. In just a few months, Seer had accumulated such wealth. His generosity was almost on par with the spiders. Among all the people Pampas had invested in over the years, Seer was by far the fastest to develop. "This is more than enough. I never thought you'd agree so readily," Pampas said, his voice filled with genuine amazement. After all, based on Seer's behavior in Meteor City, he was the type who didn't care about anyone, barely interacted with others, and only showed any enthusiasm when it came to training or interesting challenges. Who could have imagined he'd be so easygoing when it came to spending money? "Well, like the spiders, I enjoy philanthropy," Seer said lazily, his tone light and nonchalant. "Anything else?" he asked indifferently. "Nothing else," Pampas said after a moment of thought. The next second, as expected, the call was hung up. Seer had no interest in wasting time chatting with Pampas. Unless he wanted to initiate a conversation himself, his attention was focused elsewhere. Currently, his gaze was fixed on the energy bar in the corner of his system panel, the one representing his ability to traverse worlds. He noticed it had accumulated a faint layer of energy, roughly 1/10 full. There was also a list of unread notifications. "You've instilled fear in Yorknu's gangs through your ruthless slaughter. Legend points in Yorknu City, +10. Congratulations, host. Title earned, Gangbuster. Due to your deeds, everyone has been silenced under orders. Legend points in Yorknu City, +5. Congratulations, Host. Title earned, The Unspoken One. For donating 20 billion to Meteor City, your legend points in Meteor City, +10. Congratulations, Host. Title earned, Philanthropist. Current world exploration rate, 10%. The barrage of messages quietly lay there, easy to overlook without close attention. When did this energy increase? Seer ignored most of the notifications and narrowed his eyes, focusing on the energy bar's progress. He vaguely remembered it being completely empty not long ago. Could it have been from the Scarlet Eyes? If the 7 Great Beauties could help the system accumulate energy quickly. But judging by the current rate, even collecting all 7 beauties would only generate 7/10 of the energy needed. Where would the remaining portion come from? The world exploration rate? If that were the case, he'd need to take this more seriously. While the Hunter x Hunter world was fascinating, Seer had no intention of staying here forever. Once he'd taken in all the sights this world had to offer, he'd definitely move on. After all, his original goal was the Jujutsu Kaisen world. Let's check out the details on the 7 beauties, then, Seer muttered as he logged onto the Hunter website to research the 7 Great Beauties. Fortunately, this information wasn't particularly difficult to find. On the contrary, most natives of this world were already familiar with it. Only he, an outsider, had no clue. The 7 Great Beauties were as follows. 1. Scarlet Eyes. 2. Crystal Feather Bones. 3. Liquid Ore. 4. Water Glass. 5. Prism Eggs. 6. White Flame. 7. The Unknown 7th Beauty. The Unknown? Looks like it's destined to be impossible to collect all 7 beauties. If I can only gather 6, does that mean I'll have to make up the rest entirely through the world exploration rate? Seer muttered with a frown. Something about it didn't feel that simple. His gaze fell on the detailed descriptions of the 7 beauties. Crystal feather bones, the bones of a certain bird, black in color and highly toxic. Only 200 of these birds exist in the current world. White flame, a type of fish that lives in the deep seas of the polar regions, extremely difficult to catch and highly sensitive to its environment. It dies and decays instantly if mishandled. Liquid ore, a rare mineral that emits a faint icy blue glow in the dark. It is incredibly hard to mine, with only a few dozen pieces currently in existence, all in the hands of mysterious collectors. Water glass, a type of vine that grows only in extinct volcanoes, entirely transparent and with a shine resembling gemstones. Prism eggs, the fragile eggs of a nen beast, with thin shells that shimmer in a variety of colors. These items were virtually absent from the market, nearly impossible to find, and even rarer to see at auction, sometimes not appearing for decades. In short, they couldn't be obtained just by throwing money around. From their scarcity to their acquisition methods, it was clear these items would not be easy to obtain. So, this bird lives in the southern forests of the Asian continent and feeds on poisonous creatures, making its entire body toxic. Seer's expression became somewhat complicated. Hunting them was banned for ordinary people, but since he was a hunter, it probably wouldn't be an issue. Liquid ore can supposedly be mined in the Locario Mountains. Do you dare specify what the probability is? Seer sneered. If it were a high probability, there wouldn't only be a few dozen pieces in the entire world. First, I'll be a bird catcher, then a miner, and then a fisherman. As Seer considered the effort he'd need to put into collecting the 7 beauties, a thought crept into his mind. The real joke isn't the system binding me to this quest, it's me, the host, who's actually the punchline. Knock, 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 a pattern of 2 short knocks followed by 1 long sounded at the door. Sir, may I come in? Mero's voice called from outside. Come in, Seer said, rubbing his temples as he spoke. The blond youth stepped into the room, carefully phrasing the words he'd been rehearsing the entire way. Sir, About the black market gangs. Before he could finish, the boy interrupted him. I already know, the white-haired boy said calmly, his voice carrying a lazy indifference. Get the airship ready. We'll head to the Asian continent again, he instructed casually. Mero's expression turned awkward. The airship had already been sent off for a deep cleaning and wasn't usable at the moment. Is there a problem? Seer asked, noticing Mero's odd expression. Sir, the previous airship was completely unworthy of someone like you, so I sent it for a thorough cleaning and a complete overhaul. It'll take about 3 more days to be ready, Mero stammered nervously. Before Seer could respond, Mero dropped to his knees with a thud, pressing his forehead to the ground. I deeply apologize for delaying your plans. Forget it. Get up, it's not urgent, Seer said, stretching and motioning for Mero to rise. Only then did Mero stand, though he kept his head bowed low. 3 days later, the airship was finally ready. Seer observed the transformation of the once pink and white airship into its current blue and white color scheme. His expression gave no clear indication of whether he liked the change or not. This made Mero, who was sneaking glances at his reaction, feel a little uneasy. They replaced everything inside. Seer noted as soon as he stepped aboard, noticing the interior changes. The red carpet had been replaced with white plush carpeting, and all the tables, chairs, and furniture were now predominantly white. It was a complete overhaul, from top to bottom. Yes, sir. What do you think? Mero asked nervously. Everything that the Nostrate family and their people had touched, the carpet they walked on, the sofas they sat on, even the cups they used, had all been replaced. It's fine, Seer said offhandedly. He could sleep in a garbage heap if he had to, he didn't care about such things. That's a relief, Mero sighed, finally able to relax. Hey hunters. Short break. Because YouTube likes it when I transform content, so here's me. Transforming. Right now, neutral face emoji, sparkles emoji, okay, done. Let's dive back in. Chapter 88. Half a month later. Southern forests of the Kokkan Empire, Asian continent. The night was dark, with a full moon hanging high in the sky. Bang, bang, the low, resonant sound, like a drum made of goatskin being struck, echoed through the forest. Hidden in the underbrush, Seer and Mero suppressed all traces of their presence. Under the pale moonlight, a bird with feathers glistening in black and purple hues appeared by a clear spring. Its wingspan measured about 1.2 meters. It basked in the moonlight as it perched by the water, grooming its feathers. After a while, it flapped its wings, preparing to leave. Mero, freeze it, Seer ordered. Mero quickly activated his ability, forming ice from water vapor in the air. In an instant, the bird's legs and wings were encased in ice. Skay. The black bird opened its beak, letting out sharp, piercing cries. Enough with the noise. I'm only plucking a feather, the white-haired boy said lazily as he strolled over. Reaching out, he plucked one of the bird's feathers. He examined it for a while before sighing. It's not the one. Wrong bird again. A bird's feathers are connected to its bones, so a quick look at the feather was enough for him to determine its origin. This wasn't the bird he was looking for. As for why he was so confident in directly handling a bird with feathers said to be laced with deadly poison? Because he wasn't particularly afraid of poison. Back in Meteor City, he had already discovered that most poisons didn't affect him. Even deadly ones would only cause him to cough up some black blood. Afterward, he'd carry on as if nothing had happened. It looks just like the picture, though. Mero released the bird from its frozen state, voicing his confusion. Purple-black feathers, they were identical to the description. But this bird wasn't poisonous. With only 200 of them in the world, it's natural for them to be hard to find, Seer said as he dusted off his hands and sighed. Let's go. We'll head a bit further south, he said, setting off in that direction. Mero quickly followed. Meanwhile, in the direction Seer and Mero were heading, there was a group of 7. They had set up tents and were cooking a meal. Their teamwork was seamless, indicating they were seasoned experts in wilderness survival. Woof, a dog let out a low bark, its face showing an oddly cautious expression. Something wrong, Banana? The 6 people turned toward a woman, clearly addressing her. Someone is approaching us, Banana said, her eyes closed as though reading the information carried by the wind. After a brief pause, she spoke again. Poachers? A tall, nearly 2-meter tall, silver-haired man with a lean build and a stern expression asked. At this time, anyone appearing in the forest was likely trying to hunt rare creatures illegally. Of course, the 7 of them were different. They had been commissioned by the Kakan Empire to investigate new life forms in the area. Prepare for battle, the silver-haired man warned. The campfire was promptly extinguished, and the group dispersed, each finding a hiding spot, ready to ambush whoever arrived. It wasn't long before a group of armed individuals dragging a sedated animal appeared. The creature was unconscious, a massive syringe embedded in its body, a telltale sign of poachers. Their identities were unmistakable. Leave the animals behind, said 7 figures emerging from their hiding spots, blocking the poachers' path. Gunshots echoed through the forest ahead, startling birds into flight. Seer glanced forward, his striking blue 6 eyes glinting with awareness. Someone's coming, he said softly. A group of panicked individuals, as if chased by a predator, came into view, running frantically. Damn it! Those meddling bastards! One of the leading men cursed as he ran, his eyes widening slightly when he saw Mero and Seer ahead. After a moment, his face twisted into a scowl. Get lost. Don't block the way. Before Seer could react, Mero stepped forward angrily. How dare you speak to the master like that? A row of sharp, icy blades materialized in the air, slicing toward the rude man. The poachers, however, weren't ordinary people. One of them raised a hand, conjuring a large, pink, circular barrier that shielded them from Mero's attack. We misjudged you. You two aren't ordinary folks. Apologies for earlier. Next time we meet, drinks are on us. The man who had spoken rudely quickly changed his tone, his adaptability evident. We'll be going now, he said, turning to flee with the others. More dangerous individuals were on their tail, they had no time to waste on these 2 strangers. Why the rush? Seer's soft laugh rang out, his voice ethereal, almost like the wind itself. Perfect. I've been meaning to test this. Cursed technique reversal, red. Seer extended his hand, and crimson energy flared to life, radiating an overwhelming force far greater than his previous techniques. Go, he murmured, a slight flick of his finger sending the red energy streaking toward the fleeing group. Their pink barrier hadn't even faded before the red energy caught up with them. Upon contact, the crimson glow exploded, obliterating their shield with an unstoppable force. The poachers themselves were caught in the blast, sent flying as the red energy tore through their formation. Some were hurled back, crashing through a dozen trees before hitting the ground, coughing blood. Even so, a few still struggled to crawl away, bloodied but desperate. One managed to drag himself forward a few steps before a sharp, icy pain gripped his ankle. Don't even think about escaping. If you're frozen solid, you'll shatter like glass, said Mero, appearing before him, an icy blade in his hand shattering dramatically with a loud crack. The men glanced down in terror to see their legs frozen solid from the knees down. The destructive power of the red covered an area of at least 100 meters, drawing the attention of Kite and his team, who had been pursuing the poachers. They quickened their pace. But when they arrived, they didn't find the poachers, they found 2 unfamiliar figures instead. One was a golden-haired young man, the other a white-haired boy. Unlike the poachers, these two carried no guns or weapons. They weren't trying to hide their identities either. Instead, they stood openly, their relaxed demeanor making it seem as if they were simply out for a leisurely stroll. They weren't poachers' accomplices. But who were they? And why were they here at this time? Having already encountered several groups of poachers, the 7-member team maintained a vigilant demeanor. Even the lone dog among them bared its teeth, body crouched low, ready to pounce at any moment. "Who are you? And why are you here?" The silver-haired man adjusted the brim of his blue hat and asked calmly. He was clearly the spokesperson for the team. "That's none of your business. I go wherever I please," the white-haired boy replied arrogantly, his tone lofty. He released his aura unabashedly, creating an oppressive atmosphere that intimidated the group. Everyone except the silver-haired man showed signs of being shaken. The silver-haired man, holding a scythe taller than himself, stood like a grim reaper incarnate. "If you're poachers, you're not welcome here," he said, his tone carrying an unmistakable warning. "We're hunters," Seer replied nonchalantly, pulling out his hunter license to show them while blatantly lying. "We're here on assignment to investigate the local ecosystem and food chain." The sight of the license caused the 7-member team to relax slightly. At least they no longer looked as though they were facing a dire threat. "So, someone this young is a professional hunter?" A bespectacled man in the group stammered nervously. "It's not strange for the Kaken Empire to commission other teams simultaneously," a long-haired woman said, chewing gum nonchalantly. "After all, the Empire was known for its wealth." "You're here for biological research too?" The silver-haired man, whose name was Kite, asked with a hint of doubt. "Exactly," Seer replied without hesitation. "Your team only has 2 members. Kite frowned. As a 1-star hunter, Kite knew the value of teamwork. His own group of 7 comprised individuals with diverse expertise, enabling them to conduct investigations more effectively. A 2-person research team, no matter how one looked at it, seemed highly suspicious. "2 isn't enough?" Seer retorted, nodding confidently, his tone brimming with provocation. His expression made it clear he thought 2 people were plenty and implied disdain for their 7-member team. Even the most composed members of Kite's group felt their tempers flare. Seer's demeanor was insufferably smug. No legitimate investigation team would consist of just 2 people, Seer was clearly lying. A subtle yet powerful aura began to swirl around Kite, causing his long hair to sway despite the absence of wind. Seer's expression shifted slightly, his gaze sharpening as he half-closed his eyes. The corner of his lips curled into a mocking smile. The 2 opposing forces clashed in the air, evenly matched, creating an intense standoff. Kite's teammates looked on in shock. That boy, or rather, that child, was holding his own against a 1-star hunter like Kite in a battle of aura. The ease and confidence in Seer's posture. Was that really something a child could possess? Chapter 89. Pressure is an intangible force, though invisible, it can always be felt. For example, when the silver-haired man and the white-haired boy faced off, everyone around them dared not even breathe. Their hearts pounded, faces unconsciously flushed, and breathing became shallow and uneven. "If you're in league with the poachers, you won't leave this forest alive today," the man wielding the massive scythe said. With a casual swing, the air seemed to ripple as though he had stirred the very field of force around him, causing a gust that lifted the bangs on the boy's forehead. "Oh, really?" the boy murmured, lifting his foot and stepping down onto the ground once more. The instant his shoe made contact, the earth trembled violently. Within a 10-meter radius around him, the ground caved in and cracked. Soil, debris, dust, and blades of grass were launched into the air. "Then let's see who walks out of here," the white-haired, blue-eyed boy sneered. A ghostly blue energy orbited his body, pulling in the floating debris, which revolved around him like moons around a planet. As his words fell, the energy shifted to a vivid red hue. In the next moment, a forceful repulsion shot the debris outward, scattering fragments of soil and stone like heavy artillery. The 6 members of the team retreated quickly, narrowly dodging projectiles that carried the force of high-powered bullets. Meanwhile, the silver-haired man tightened his grip on his massive scythe. The flying debris disintegrated into ash the moment it came within 3 meters of him. Just as a fight seemed inevitable, with the team holding their breath, another sound broke through, the echo of approaching footsteps. "You lot," a furious voice interrupted the tension. The blonde-haired youth, dragging a line of tied-up bodies strung together with grass ropes, marched toward them. His footsteps alone radiated anger. "Don't go too far. How dare you think the master would stoop to associating with trash like this?" With that, he flung the bound figures onto the ground and pointed at them, glaring at Kite and his team in fury. All 7 members of Kite's team, including the dog, turned to look at the tied-up figures now lying before them. Unsurprisingly, these were the very poachers they had been chasing. So, these 2 had already caught them. No further explanations were needed. The battered and bruised poachers were proof enough that the duo wasn't part of their group. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding. No need for this hostility," said a man with a head of frizzy, explosive hair as he stepped forward, trying to ease the tension. "If you're not poachers, then we'll leave it at that," Kite said, his tone calmer now. "But there's no need to keep up the lie that you're an investigation team. Proper investigation teams have a required number of members, unless you're someone like Jing Freaks, whose skills alone could rival an entire team." It was clear the white-haired boy didn't know this, which is why he had lied so casually in an attempt to fool professionals like Kite. "Tch," Seer clicked his tongue in annoyance. Having his lie exposed didn't faze him in the slightest. He wasn't the type to care about things like saving face. "Still, you've been a great help. We almost let these guys escape." The frizzy-haired man smiled brightly as he spoke. "We weren't helping you," the blonde youth retorted coldly. "They were rude to the master, so they brought this upon themselves. That's not really important." Hee. The man with the frizzy hair laughed awkwardly, his smile turning a bit strained. "What are you doing? Trying to make things worse?" "I'm trying to smooth things over, and here you are sabotaging everything. Are you hoping these 2 will really start fighting? These people must have others waiting for them outside the forest." "I'll go take a look," the silver-haired man said, gripping his scythe tightly. With an agile leap, he disappeared from sight in an instant. No wonder Asian continent is called the poacher's paradise. "We've already run into 3 groups this month," the pink-haired woman wearing a beret said as she blew a bubble with her gum. "Especially since more than half of this area is forest, with countless undiscovered species that have yet to be documented." Their biological research team was tasked with just such work, investigating unknown species, recording their information and behavior, and uploading it to the database. "By the way, why don't the 2 of you sit down and chat with us for a bit?" the bespectacled man stammered. "Oh, I made dinner. Want to join us?" The man with the frizzy hair enthusiastically invited them. Given the situation, it was only right to be hospitable. Not only had these 2 helped capture the poachers, but there was also something suspicious about them. Keeping them close for observation seemed much better than letting them wander off to do who knows what. The blonde-haired youth glanced at the white-haired boy, as though waiting for him to make the decision. "Let's go," Seer said after a moment's thought, giving a slight nod. When Kite returned to their camp, the scene that greeted him was unexpectedly harmonious. The white-haired boy sat comfortably on a chair, the blonde youth standing quietly behind him. Meanwhile, 5 of Kite's 6 teammates surrounded Seer, chatting with enthusiasm. Even Banana's dog lay on its back in front of the boy, exposing its belly in a sign of submission. The only one not joining the lively gathering was Stick Dina, the man with the frizzy hair, who was busy preparing food. "Oh, you're back, Kite." The white-haired boy glanced at him and gave a casual wave, as though they were long-time acquaintances. For a moment, Kite couldn't tell if this was his team or Seer's. How had he become the outsider here? "You're back, Kite. Did you know Seer and Marrow only got their hunter licenses 2 months ago?" said the short-haired, green-eyed man with a smile as he turned to Kite. "They took their exam in the eastern forest of Asian continent," added the tall man with the build of a polar bear, sounding surprised. "Only 2 months since they got their hunter licenses." The blonde one was easy enough to figure out, but the white-haired kid. His strength was unsettlingly abnormal. Could he be someone like Biscuit? If his appearance was real and his age matched it, then this boy's talent was terrifyingly extraordinary. The only comparable person that came to mind was Jing. Could he be a naturally gifted Nen user? "They said they're here looking for a bird that's completely black and venomous," the pink-haired woman chimed in. For someone well-versed in biological research, that description was enough for Kite to think of the crystal-feathered bonebird. Its body, as black as crystal, was both beautiful and deadly. Because of its allure, it had become a frequent target for poachers, captured, dismembered, and its bones harvested to become part of human collections. Or worse, used in conflict. The bird's venom was so potent that even water contaminated by its feathers or bones could cause death. This wasn't just speculation, it had been proven time and time again at the cost of countless lives. Chapter 90. You guys are professional biological researchers, so you must have seen that kind of bird before, right? Seer asked bluntly. To his surprise, 6 out of the 7 shook their heads. "Nope, never seen it. That bird might as well be a legend." Even the dog whimpered and shook its head. "A bird no one's ever seen?" Seer's face fell, his expression drooping in visible disappointment. He looked dejected and unmotivated. If even these hunters, specializing in biological research, hadn't seen it, just how rare could it be? "If you're determined to find it, I suggest heading to the southwestern depths," Kite said quietly, his hat brim and long hair casting shadows over most of his face, leaving only his sharp jawline visible. "That area has the most poisonous creatures, so your chances of finding it are higher there. If you stumble across a snake nest, your odds go up even more." His detailed explanation made him seem like a kind-hearted and helpful person. "Southwest, huh? Got it." Seer raised one brow thoughtfully before giving a small nod. "Oh, right, Kite, did you manage to catch the people responsible for their extraction?" the pink-haired woman suddenly asked, seemingly to steer the conversation elsewhere. "When I got there, the place was already empty," Kite shook his head. "This time, they ran." "So quickly?" The bespectacled man adjusted his glasses nervously. "They probably got tipped off," the dog's owner chimed in. Everyone knew exactly why the extraction team had bolted so quickly. It was clearly because of that massive disturbance caused by the red flash of energy. If even the animals in the vicinity had fled in silence, it was no surprise that intelligent humans had done the same. No one spoke further after that. Occasionally, members of the 7-person team would lean toward each other and whisper quietly. After finishing the meal, Seer stood up, ready to leave. "Well then, we'll be on our way." "What? Let these 2 suspicious people act alone?" The man with the explosive hairstyle immediately stood up, extending a hand to stop them. "Wait, why don't we go together?" Hearing this, Seer's gaze turned toward him, tinged with a strange look. "We are planning to head southwest too," the man said firmly. "Right?" He turned to his teammates, seeking confirmation. "That's not wrong." "Yeah, that's true." "Uh-huh." His teammates were quick to back him up, each giving some form of agreement. They genuinely had plans to head southwest, or else they wouldn't have coincidentally bumped into Seer and his companion, who were heading south. "All right then," Seer replied nonchalantly. With that, the tall, bear-like man hoisted the camping gear onto his back, and the group packed up their belongings and began their journey. In the forest, many animals are active only at night. As a result, Kite and his team often stayed hidden during the day and ventured out at night. Occasionally, they would work around the clock, spending entire days searching for new creatures. Walking under the cover of night, the group felt a sense of calm. Suddenly, the dog dashed toward a spot and began pawing at the soil, turning its head repeatedly to signal something. "This is fresh dung." Banana crouched down to inspect it, her nose twitching slightly. "There must be a large carnivore nearby," she concluded and warned the group. This wasn't surprising, this forest was teeming with life. For them, the hope was always to encounter a species that had never been documented before. They continued forward for a while until faint flickers of firelight became visible in the distance. "Is it people?" The group halted momentarily. But no, it wasn't. Still, the sight ahead was, in its own way, quite shocking, like waking up the day after the dog refused to eat your terrible cooking, only to find it had stayed up all night to prepare a full 4-dish meal. Seer scratched his cheek with his fingertip, realizing that maybe his worldview was still a bit too limited. Meanwhile, Kite and the others crept closer, hiding behind low bushes, and used binoculars to observe the creatures within a cave not far away. Inside were 2 fully grown tiger-like creatures along with a few cubs. One of the cubs, however, looked completely out of place compared to the others. Unlike the typical orange and black stripes, it had white fur with black stripes, as if it had undergone some sort of genetic mutation. The rest of the tiger family had the usual orange fur with black stripes, but they all had a single horn on their foreheads. Apart from that feature, they resembled ordinary tigers. However, these tigers were making a fire. Using a burning tree branch, they ignited another pile of sticks. What's more, they were roasting their prey, skewering it on branches and cooking it over the fire. So, really, how different were tigers that could start a fire and grill meat from dogs that could cook a full meal? Seer crossed his arms and covered his mouth with one hand, trying to hide his amazement at the bizarre scene. Yet, the spark of curiosity and fascination was evident in the corners of his eyes and the slight upward tilt of his brows. "New species," one of the team members said as they pulled out specialized equipment to take photos and record their observations. "Tigers that can make a fire and cook. I'd say we call them camping tigers," the man carrying camping gear suggested tentatively. The aroma of the cooked prey filled the air. The 2 adult tigers tore off the tenderest pieces of meat and placed them in front of their cubs. Only after watching the cubs nibble at the food did they begin devouring their own portions. The cubs surrounded the meat on the ground, wolfing it down ravenously. However, the white cub seemed unable to squeeze in. It wasn't just excluded, it was also visibly smaller than the others. If no unexpected circumstances had occurred, these cubs should have been siblings from the same litter. "The white cub won't grow up," the pink-haired woman said calmly, as if she had seen this scenario countless times before and could no longer feel sad about it. In the wild, very few cubs survive. The law of the jungle, survival of the fittest, reigns supreme everywhere. Whether it's humans or beasts, the rule is the same. The white cub was visibly smaller than its siblings. It clearly wasn't the first time it had failed to get food, and the 2 adult tigers made no effort to intervene. With its striking appearance and weak constitution, it seemed the adult tigers had already decided to abandon it. The group continued their observations, staying hidden until dawn broke. The 2 adult tigers eventually led their cubs out of the cave. The white cub staggered along, struggling to keep up. As the group followed at a distance, they watched as the gap between the white cub and its family widened. The 2 adult tigers glanced back once but didn't stop, continuing on their way without hesitation. Left behind, the white cub stopped following. It wandered in circles for a while before changing direction, heading toward the group's hiding spot. Before it could get too close, Seer stepped out and picked it up. The cub curled up its limbs, its black striped forehead forming the faint outline of the character for king. Its light blue eyes sparkled, clear and bright like liquid gemstones. As it locked eyes with the white-haired boy, for a brief moment, the group felt as if they were seeing two white tigers, one big, one small. White fur. The pink-haired woman glanced at the tiger. Black markings. The man with the wild, curly hair looked at Seer. Blue eyes. The bespectacled man nervously shifted his gaze back and forth between the two. The resemblance wasn't just slight, it was uncanny. Compared to the other tiger family members, this boy and the cub looked more like relatives. "It's mine now," Seer declared after staring at the white tiger for a long time. He rubbed its ears with an expression of sheer delight. If given the chance, who wouldn't want to raise a majestic silver-white tiger? Back in his previous life, he could only see these creatures in zoos. If he wanted one to pet, he would have had to travel abroad. After all, his place at that time didn't allow the keeping of white tigers. But now, the opportunity was right in front of him. How could he pass it up? Just as this thought crossed his mind, two thunderous roars suddenly erupted behind him. Roar, roar. The sound was deafening, like rolling thunder. The powerful shockwaves caused nearby trees to tremble violently, leaves raining down in a flurry. The ground itself shook, with large patches of grass uprooted. The two adult tigers had returned. Chapter 91. The two magical beasts were far larger than ordinary tigers, their muscles resembling solid chunks of stone that radiated immense strength and ferocity. Standing there, they seemed like two small mountains, blocking out the sunlight and casting a massive shadow. An invisible wind swirled around them with every breath they took. With just a thought, that gentle, harmless breeze could transform into a deadly attack. With each inhale and exhale, Seer's hair and clothes swayed in rhythm with their breathing. "Human, put down my child," one of the tigers said, raising a paw and pointing at them, speaking in a deep, resonant voice. The tiger spoke. Oh, right, they were magical beasts. In the hunter world, it wasn't unusual for magical beasts to talk. In the original story, Killua and the others encountered a magical beast disguised as an examiner during the hunter exam, and there were even magical beasts that cooperated with the Hunter Association as test proctors. What's more, these two seemed to control the wind. Feeling the shifting wind patterns around him, Seer's gaze settled on the two massive tigers. The rest of the group had already adopted defensive stances, ready to spring into action at any moment. But the tigers didn't seem intent on fighting. Instead, one impatiently pawed at the ground, leaving deep claw marks in the dirt. "What do you mean, your child? This little guy clearly looks more like he's related to me," Seer said, holding up the white tiger cub and giving it a small shake. He pointed at the cub, then at himself. Same white fur, black stripes, and blue eyes. Honestly, it was hard to tell whether the tiger had turned into him or he had turned into the tiger. "Do you see any resemblance between it and you?" The white-haired boy boldly questioned the two large tigers. "Your kid is great, but now it's mine." The two tigers fell silent, their breathing still rumbling like thunder, their presence overwhelming. The wind picked up, growing more intense. It whipped across their faces, stinging sharply like tiny needles. The tigers were clearly deep in thought. As self-proclaimed kings of this forest, they were fully capable of raising their young, even if this particular cub looked nothing like them and was far too frail. But that frailty also meant the cub wasn't promising. They had initially planned to abandon it. Yet in the end, they chose to return. These were magical beasts with intelligence equal to humans. They balanced reason with instinct, and in this case, reason outweighed their animalistic nature. Otherwise, they wouldn't be building fires, roasting meat, and eating cooked food. Tigers are solitary creatures. They don't care for their young indefinitely. Eventually, they drive them away once they're old enough. A weak cub like this one would likely die the day after being expelled from their territory. Now, a human had appeared, wanting to take this cub they were prepared to abandon. The tigers had seen humans come into the forest before to capture animals. Those humans had been rough, cruel, and ruthless. None of the captured animals ever returned. They had likely died outside the forest. The two tigers exchanged a glance, then both fixed their gaze on the boy holding their good-for-nothing son. Say what you will, but that human boy's appearance did resemble their cubs. Still, could magical beasts really trust a human? "Human, can we trust you?" the male tiger asked in a deep, resonant voice. Even though he kept his tone low, the sheer power behind it made Seer's ears buzz. Apparently, in addition to controlling the wind, these two tigers could also use their roars for sonic attacks. Seer blinked expressionlessly. After a moment of thought, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his hunter license. "I'm a hunter. You magical beasts should know about hunters, right?" Even if his personal credibility was impeccable, these two tigers wouldn't believe him. It was better to rely on his identity as a hunter. At least in this world, hunters had an excellent reputation. The hunter license was essentially a universal pass, valid anywhere you needed it. What's a hunter? The two tigers, however, looked utterly confused. Their massive tiger faces were full of bewilderment, making it clear they had no clue what he was talking about. Seer's mouth twitched as he put away the now useless license. He ran a hand through the back of his hair and sighed, "Are you two shut-in tigers or something?" No way, they really didn't know what a hunter was. Other magical beasts know about cooperating with the Hunter Association and have even become test proctors. And then there's you two. You've never even heard of hunters. The white-haired boy's face was a picture of disappointment, like a parent scolding a child for failing to meet expectations. Look at the other magical beasts and then look at yourselves. Aren't you embarrassed? No wonder you were planning to abandon your kid. Must be a lack of education, Seer thought to himself with a huff. Educated ones just choose not to have kids at all. The two massive tigers were stunned by his words. What? Magical beasts cooperating with humans? What kind of world was this turning into? It's not surprising they don't know, the man with the explosion of hair said thoughtfully. They're a newly discovered species, after all. If they weren't so reclusive, we'd have found them ages ago. Plenty of magical beasts like them live deep in this forest, far away from humans, practically in hiding. The two tigers were silent for a long time. Finally, the tigress spoke. Human boy, I trust you. As a tigress, her ability to judge males was unparalleled. Just by his aura, she could tell that this human boy held a high position among his own kind. You can take it with you. Once the tigress had spoken, the male tiger immediately backed down. It was clear who was in charge. It was a classic case of a henpecked tiger. A wise choice, Seer said with a snap of his fingers, grinning as he gave a thumbs up. Otherwise, he might have ended up as the murderer of the little white tiger's siblings and parents. He had no other option. If he wanted to raise the tiger, he had to have it. Anyone or anything that stood in his way, whether human or magical beast, would have to die. Though the boy's face carried a smile, his eyes remained cold. His gaze swept briefly over Kite, the rest of the group, and the tiger family. He said no more. Well then, human boy, would you like to give it a name? The tigress asked. Let's call it Sora, Seer said lightly, looking at the blue-eyed white tiger cub. Very well, Sora, you shall now follow this human boy. You will protect him, fight for him, and serve him until the end of your life, the tigress said, turning to her child. The horn on her forehead suddenly glowed with a gentle black light. The contract is sealed. The black light split into two beams, one entering the cub and the other Seer. As the ritual ended, the tigress visibly weakened, her energy fading before their eyes. "Ma'am. Are you all right?" The blonde youth scanned her nervously from head to toe, seemingly wanting to examine her more closely to figure out what the black light might have done. "Ice mirror," Seer ordered casually. "Yes." Mero immediately raised his hand, conjuring a human-sized sheet of ice. Seer studied the cub for a moment, then turned to the reflection in the mirror. After a while, he stuck out his tongue. On his tongue was a distinct black mark, a wind sigil, or perhaps more accurately, a rose compass pattern. Chapter 92. The rose compass pattern symbolizes direction and is a common element in navigation systems. However, the mark on Seer's tongue was distinct from ordinary rose compass designs. It was encircled by symbols of hurricanes on either side, with triangular eye-like shapes above and below. At the center was the compass itself. The design appeared more mysterious, even carrying a faint sense of foreboding. He hadn't expected that his simple wish to adopt a tiger cub would result in another tattoo-like mark on his tongue. At least it wasn't some mortifyingly dramatic design that would make him avoid showing it in public. If it had been something like a green dragon on the left, white tiger on the right full-body tattoo, Seer would have made sure to wear long sleeves, long pants, and a jacket every day to cover himself completely. Both the curse marks from Sukuna and the tattoo on his tongue were, thankfully, relatively aesthetic. That said, if he stuck his tongue out, would anyone mistake him for a cursed speech user like Toge Inumaki? Seer retracted his tongue, pressing his lips together as he turned his gaze to the now exhausted tigress. The male tiger nuzzled her head gently, his massive tiger eyes brimming with affection. "This contract comes from our inherited memory," the tigress explained weakly. "Sora will remain eternally loyal to you, never betraying you. And you won't be able to abandon him. This is my only request," she added softly. Having once abandoned their own child, they didn't want him to be forsaken by a human as well. Seer raised a brow, a faint smile curving his lips. "Aren't you worried I might harm him?" Was that truly all the contract entailed? As long as he didn't abandon Sora, everything would be fine? The malice of humanity could be immense, after all. "You genuinely like Sora and aren't the kind of human who hides his true nature," the tigress replied. She wasn't wrong. If Seer hadn't cared for the cub, he wouldn't have bothered with it in the first place. Seer lowered his gaze, locking eyes with the white tiger cub. His cold, pale blue eyes met the cub's clear, light blue animal pupils. "Grow up quickly," Seer said, giving the cub a slight shake. Though its small, fluffy appearance was adorable, Seer much preferred the imposing build of its parents. Towering, powerful, the fearsome kings of the forest. To him, such strength and grandeur were far more beautiful than cuteness. That was his aesthetic. "Are you really going to raise it? Taking care of such a large magical beast will cost a fortune," the man with the explosive hair commented, scratching his head out of concern. As soon as he said it, though, he remembered the boy's strength. Oh, right. With that kind of power, Seer wouldn't lack money no matter what. "It doesn't matter," Seer replied nonchalantly, tucking the cub into the hood of his jacket. The little tiger wobbled as it gripped his clothing, eventually settling on his shoulder. "By the way, since you've been in the forest for so long, have you seen a bird like this?" Seer pulled out his phone, opening a picture and showing it to the two tigers. The tigers leaned their heads together, peering at the image. "Never seen it," they said in unison, shaking their heads. Even the forest's longtime residents had never seen such an animal. "Then forget it, let's go." Seer waved at Mero to follow him. The two large tigers remained seated, their thick tails raised high as they watched the group leave. Even the tiger cubs mimicked their parents, sitting in a neat row with their tails swaying back and forth. Kite and the others, who had remained mostly silent, occasionally glanced back at the magical beasts behind them, seemingly worried they might suddenly attack. However, The boy walking in front showed no concern whatsoever and didn't look back even once. His calm, composed demeanor was almost admirable. Fortunately, the magical beasts never made a move, even after the group disappeared from sight. "By the way, Mero, you teach it to speak." Seer suddenly remembered something, shoving the little tiger into Mero's arms with a cheerful tone, as if unloading a burden. The big tigers could talk, so there was no reason their beloved cub couldn't learn. It was worth a try. After all, an animal that could communicate was far better than one that couldn't. Me? All right, I'll do it, Mero stammered, holding the tiger cub awkwardly. Did he like the cub? Of course. After all, it bore some resemblance to the esteemed seer. But teaching a magical beast to speak, that was tough. He'd need to look up some information. No matter how difficult the task, if Seer assigned it to him, Mero would ensure it got done. Still, that bird is truly mysterious, Seer sighed. Their path continued southwest, and the farther they went, the more poisonous creatures they encountered. The air grew increasingly humid, the temperature colder and gloomier. The ground beneath their feet became softer and more unstable, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the wind. Although the forest appeared peaceful, Seer's six-eyed vision revealed clusters of life energy scattered all around, bright and impossible to ignore. He casually stepped over a venomous snake without breaking stride. Kite, who had been observing for a while, finally spoke, as if he'd made up his mind. "The bird you're looking for. It's already extinct." Seer stopped in his tracks. What? His eyes widened in surprise before his brows furrowed, irritation flickering in his voice. Extinct? Seriously? He clicked his tongue, pressing for confirmation. Was this whole trip a waste? Well, not entirely. At least he'd found a tiger cub to raise. But his primary goal had been the bird. Kate adjusted the brim of his hat, while the other team members either stared at the sky, counted ants on the ground, or looked around aimlessly. You. Seer suddenly leaned in close to Kite, his half-narrowed eyes scrutinizing him suspiciously. You're not lying to me, are you? His voice dropped, tinged with doubt. Why mention this now, of all times? It was hard not to suspect that Kite was trying to stop him from reaching his goal. This was supposed to be classified information, Kate replied, his expression calm and voice steady. But since you are a hunter, there's no reason to hide it anymore. That bird went extinct 10 years ago. It just hasn't been announced to the public, Kate continued. The so-called remaining 200 refers to the number of specimens scattered among different private collectors. The crystal feather bone is one of the 7 great beauties. When the bird possessing this bone was alive, no one paid much attention to it. Only when it was stripped of all its feathers, hollowed out, and left as a complete skeleton displayed under light did it reveal its true form, the black crystal bird. Collectors typically preserve the entire skeleton of the bird. As a result, they've long been extinct. For at least the past 10 years, no one has seen any trace of them. This has only made them more mysterious, and their bones even more valuable, the silver-haired man explained. Like the Korta clan, huh? Seer sneered. Among the 7 great beauties, the Korta clan with their scarlet eyes had been wiped out. The number of scarlet eyes would never increase again, only decrease, their price climbing higher and higher. Similarly, the birds with crystal feather bones were driven to extinction by human greed. 2 of the 7 great beauties, both destroyed by humans. Humans, huh? Not surprising, really, Seer shook his head. The malice in human nature, greed, envy, possessiveness, was far more terrifying than anything else. He didn't sympathize with the Korta clan or the crystal birds. What irked him was how his plans had been disrupted. What if I must obtain a crystal feather bone? The white-haired boy asked, his expression blank, his presence radiating such intense pressure it seemed to take physical form. Then you'll have to seek out the well-known collectors, the pink-haired woman replied calmly. As for whether those collectors would be willing to part with their treasures. If they were willing, the market wouldn't be barren of such items in the first place. Chapter 93. Collectors. Damn those greedy collectors. The world was full of these collectors, making everything 10 times more troublesome for him. If it weren't for their insatiable greed, leaving no room for those who came after them, would Seer be struggling to find something like this now? How annoying. In the grass beneath his feet, a venomous snake oblivious to human moods slithered forward. Spotting the pale, delicate legs of a human, it couldn't resist biting. Yet its sharp fangs failed to even pierce the skin. The white-haired boy let out an exasperated laugh, spreading his fingers to cover his face. Only his low chuckles could be heard. Kill them all. Through the gaps in his fingers, his piercing blue eyes shone with an icy killing intent. A dark blue energy began to swirl around him, forming a gravitational pull so strong that the others nearby struggled to maintain their footing. They had to dig their heels into the ground, leaving deep indentations, to stop themselves from being dragged toward him. But not everything around them had the same ability. Kai clutched his hat with one hand, while the others behind him covered their heads protectively. The pulling sensation on their scalps sent shivers down their spines. No one wanted to end up bald, right? In the overgrown grasslands of the southwest, teeming with venomous snakes, the intense gravitational pull tore through everything. Grass, snakes, and shrubs were all uprooted and sent hurtling toward Seer. A glowing blue sphere of energy expanded and pulsed, its pull so overwhelming that even the tall trees and their hidden serpentine residents were shredded to pieces. Seer's posture resembled that of a conductor leading an orchestra, his hands outstretched. The massive sphere of debris grew larger and larger until, with a light wave of his hand, he sent it flying far into the distance. A flash of red light followed. The ball of debris had barely hit the ground before another explosive burst of energy obliterated it. The deafening boom echoed across the area, leaving a massive crater in the distance. The shattered rocks and uneven ground bore witness to what once existed there. Not playing around anymore, Seer said, the smile vanishing from his face as he turned to Mero, his expression cold. Find out who's hoarding crystal feather bones. One by one, he'd pay them a visit. Someone had to have what he needed. And if he ended up wanted as a serial killer, so be it. He could always become the world's ultimate villain, kill anyone who came after him, challenge Netero to a final duel, lose and rot in prison, or win and eat a nuke. Wait. The thought of eating a nuke cooled his head somewhat. He wasn't sure he could survive that. And if a bunch of people came at him shouting about friendship or bonds or whatever nonsense, well, there wouldn't be much to say. Still, it didn't need to come to that. He had no intention of becoming like Sukuna, a villain despised for thousands of years, ancient or modern. Unless, of course, he decided to ditch humanity altogether and head to the Dark Continent to hang out with magical beasts. I understand, Mero replied crisply. He immediately turned and grabbed his phone, calling the information specialists in the Palisha family. Since returning from Yorknu, Seer had shown no hesitation in leveraging the Palisha family's resources. Kite, the 7 other team members, and their dog all glanced at him, sensing his oppressive mood but unsure what to say. Telling him to let it go? That wouldn't work. After all, Seer had become a professional hunter at such a young age. Hunters were inherently willful, and given his age, that willfulness was likely doubled. But his sudden interest in investigating who possessed crystal feather bones. Could he actually be planning to kill and loot them? Well, since they're extinct, there's no point in us lingering here either, Seer exhaled slowly, watching the dust settle from the explosion. His mood seemed to calm somewhat. Hey, Kite, let's take a photo together, he said with a smile, pulling out a camera. Though Seer had little impression of Kite, he couldn't ignore the silver-haired scythe-wielding figure. Characters like him, with striking features and flashy weapons, were never just background extras. Perfect for his collection. A photo? With me. That's not really neck. Kite, adjusting his hat nervously, tried to refuse, but before he could finish, Seer had already pulled him close, forcing him to bend down slightly. With a loud click, the moment was captured. Kite's face was full of shock, his hat tilted askew, while Seer grinned brightly, looking as if he had just pulled off the perfect prank. "Let's go, Marrow." With a small push off the ground, Seer disappeared in an instant. "Wait for me, sir," Marrow yelled, clutching the little tiger cub as he hurried to catch up. Kite stood in silence for a moment, fixing his hat. Strange kid. Even after such a short time together, Kite felt like he had a decent grasp of Seer's personality, willful, self-centered, completely unconcerned with others, and yet managing to make it seem perfectly natural. "If he were a bit older, he'd be my type," the pink-haired woman said, blowing a bubble with her gum, her tone ambiguous. "What? Are you serious?" The rest of the group stared at her in disbelief. Of course, the girl continued chewing her gum, holding her laptop bag. "You tell me," she teased, leaving her intent unclear. How were they supposed to guess? Did she really like that type? The Palaisha family's investigation was conducted openly and boldly, meticulously gathering transaction records from auctions over the past few decades to identify buyers and sellers of crystal feather bones. This activity quickly attracted the attention of several mafia families. After the events from not long ago, many in the underworld had linked the Palaisha family to that unmentionable boy. Wasn't their heir still trailing after him? Rumor even had it that old Palaisha had given Seer his personal heirship. What kind of close relationship was this? It couldn't just be a business partnership, no one would go that far. Not even for an illegitimate child would they be this generous. Several mafia bosses, wary of Palaisha's actions, convened a short meeting via video call. They decided to send a representative to probe the Palaisha family for answers. The response they received was, "Because that boy wants crystal feather bones but couldn't find any, he plans to see which collectors might have them. Word is, he's preparing to pay them a visit to borrow some." Pay them a visit? What happened to the families who got visited before? Oh, right, they were wiped out. Who would dare let him visit now? This is a blatant death notice. No. Absolutely not. One of the people at the meeting slammed the table in anger. "We cannot give him the chance to come knocking. What should we do? We need to unite and then." While the mafia bosses huddled together to plan their next steps, far above the Asian continent, Seer leisurely reviewed the collected information aboard the slowly cruising airship. There were only a handful of transactions involving crystal feather bones with actual records. As for the unrecorded private exchanges, it was impossible to trace who had received them. "The records we do have mostly come from black market auctions, and the buyers are all members of the mafia," Marrow explained from the side. Compared to ordinary people, there were far more mafia members into macabre collections, and something like crystal feather bones, beautiful yet poisonous, perfectly aligned with their aesthetics. "Then we'll visit them one by one," Seer said dismissively, barely glancing at the list of names before lazily closing his eyes. The names of those about to die weren't worth remembering. Chapter 94. A week later, the airship was still flying above the vast ocean. Seer leaned over, peering through the transparent glass floor at the shimmering, jade-like waters below. Then, with a flick of his hand, he toppled the card tower he had been meticulously building. "How much longer until we get there?" he asked without looking up, his gaze fixed on the scattered cards now strewn across the floor. Although life aboard the airship was relaxing, with plenty of food and entertainment, Seer could not stand staying idle in one place for too long. He wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed locking himself indoors. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been flying all over the place, competing in various tournaments at home and abroad, attending conventions, and even posting videos online. About another week until we reach the area where the first target is located. Mero calculated the time and distance before answering. A week, huh? The airship is so slow, Seer sighed, his voice filled with discontent. 2 days later, Mero received a call. Sir. After hanging up, he looked at the white-haired youth, his tone somewhat peculiar. The crystal feather bones have been found. Apparently, a few mafia families have volunteered to gift them to you. Mero's expression shifted from confusion to awe. They must have been so moved by Sir Seer's charisma. Surely, they wanted to forge a good relationship with him. Mero didn't even consider that perhaps they were simply trying to avoid a visit from the Reaper. They said as long as you provide an address, they'll have someone deliver it immediately, Mero added, his tone full of excitement. Seer was finally getting what he wanted, and Mero couldn't help but feel happy for him. However, the white-haired youth remained calm, his expression tinged with thought. Mafia members. Were they really this nice? Do they also have liquid ore, white fire, or rainbow eggs? Seer asked eagerly. It would be great if these generous mafia families could help him collect all 7 treasures at once. Liquid ore might be possible, but white fire and rainbow eggs are living organisms. The chances of them having those. Mero trailed off, his tone implying the likelihood was close to 0. Seer understood the unspoken words. Because mafia collectors almost exclusively deal with inanimate objects, white fire is only valuable when alive. As for rainbow eggs, hardly anyone has ever seen one. Let's think about the address then. Seer crossed his legs, lazily tapping his fingers on the armrest of the sofa. Their original destination was no longer necessary since those people were far too reasonable. So reasonable, in fact, that Seer didn't even feel like bothering with them. They had no grudges or enmity, and with his goal already achieved, there was no need to kill them. Next is liquid ore. It's said that it was once mined near the Rocario Republic's mountains. But the specifics are unclear, and the exact location isn't known, Seer said, scrolling through his phone and tapping the screen a few times. Rocario is also known as the Kingdom of Gems. It accounts for 65% of the world's gemstone production, and many of its residents make a living from mining, Mero explained, recalling details about the region. It's said that the first liquid ore ever discovered was found in Rocario. The Mafia sent people to search for it too, but Rocario. Well, the locals are rather traditional, Mero said, his tone carrying a hint of awkwardness. Rocario had no restrictions on firearms, so nearly every household owned guns. Because of the gem mines, the residents were fiercely protective of their interests, making them tough and unyielding. The local armed groups were numerous and dominant, leaving outside mafia groups unable to compete. After losing some manpower, the rest of the mafia gave up. It's the complete opposite of NGL, even though they're on the same continent, Mero added. Then again, NGL didn't even allow outside mafia groups to set foot in their territory. Their strict border control deterred anyone from seriously attempting entry. Now I'm curious to see just how fierce they really are, Seer said, raising an intrigued eyebrow. The airship adjusted its course, setting a new destination. Some time later. In a tavern located in Dali City, near the Lost Mountains within the Rocario Republic. The white-haired youth sat at the bar, a glass of rainbow-colored liquor before him. It was said to contain 1% juice from the rare rainbow fruit, which gave it its natural, vibrant hue. Naturally, it was quite expensive. The striking appearance of the drink had already drawn many curious glances toward the boy. Sir, the item has arrived. A blonde-haired young man kicked open the tavern door, carrying a box as he strode in, covered in dust from travel. That was fast, Seer said, taking the box and opening it without hesitation. Inside was another box, tightly packed for protection. After finally unwrapping everything, a bird skeleton encased in glass was revealed. Its entire structure was jet black, gleaming with a translucent crystalline sheen. It was breathtakingly beautiful, enough to draw admiration from anyone who saw it. But that was all. Most ordinary people hadn't even heard of such a thing. To the locals of Rocario, who were accustomed to all kinds of gemstones, even this black crystal skeleton only warranted a couple of glances before their attention shifted elsewhere. However, in a corner of the tavern, a girl with golden braids and wide blue eyes stared intently at the skeleton in Seer's hands. The 7 treasures. That must be one of the 7 treasures, the crystal feather bones. It might not be a gemstone, but it was still one of the 7 treasures. And that boy. He was someone familiar. Perhaps. The blonde-haired girl thought about this as she lifted the hem of her skirt and approached the boy with an incredibly adorable demeanor. A cute girl never has bad luck. With her level of cuteness, today's luck would surely be on her side. Seer glanced at the skeleton a few times but couldn't see the so-called beauty in it. So, he casually handed it over to the system. A small hand silently reached toward the transparent box containing the skeleton. Before it could even touch it, the skeleton and box vanished into thin air. Crystal feather bones acquired, the system chimed in. The energy progress bar in the corner ticked up slightly. Ah, the blonde girl, who had been sneaking closer only to find nothing there, fell to the ground. She looked pitifully at the blonde-haired young man nearby with her dewy, tearful eyes. A blonde, blue-eyed, handsome youth, perfect. She liked him too. Although the white-haired boy was nice, he was still too young. But the blonde youth, while still somewhat fresh-faced, his physique had clearly reached adulthood. A perfect blend of maturity and youthful charm. Excellent. He fit her aesthetic. Bonus points. Surely, he wouldn't be unable to appreciate the charm of a lovely young lady like her. And he definitely wouldn't do something like cutting off half of a beautiful girl's hair, right? Right? Ah. I twisted my ankle. I can't stand. Please carry me, the blonde-haired girl said softly in a weak and delicate tone. The blonde youth frowned, staring at her with a conflicted expression but said nothing. Meanwhile, Seer turned his head to the side, covering his lower face as he stifled a laugh. It was exactly the same. This familiar routine. Back in the desert, she had pulled the same act on him. And now, pretending not to know him, she was reenacting the same scene right in front of him, huh? Although the current version of her looked like an ordinary little girl, Seer couldn't forget the image he had seen through his tarot cards, a hulking, muscle-bound Amazon. If Marrow fell for her tricks, well, Seer would have a lifetime's worth of material to mock him with. Under the blonde-haired girl's pitiful and longing gaze, the blonde youth furrowed his brows and coldly said, "Move. You're in the way." Blocking the path between him and Seer? Was she trying to get Seer's attention? Falling down had to be deliberate, right? Ha, he'd seen this kind of tactic plenty of times. The blonde-haired girl's expression froze, her face stiffening as if she had been dealt a severe blow. She turned to stone, her entire figure transforming into a gray statue. How could this be? Another man completely unmoved and lacking any gentlemanly behavior. Meanwhile, in a more hidden corner of the tavern, a man with blonde hair and triangular sunglasses lowered his glass of liquor. His drifting gaze occasionally landed on Seer before quickly pulling back with restraint. Chapter 95. Rawr. A small, fluffy creature with a white coat and black stripes leaped in front of the blonde-haired girl, shaking its tiny head and letting out a baby-like growl. It was clearly trying to display a fierce posture to intimidate her. But Biscuit only thought, "What an adorable little thing." She scooped up the fluffy cub in one motion and began shamelessly squeezing and rubbing it. The white tiger cub, dizzy and disoriented from all the squeezing, looked dazed before desperately biting the hem of Seer's shirt in a plea for help. Seer glanced at the cub but didn't intervene. Too weak, of course, it was only natural for it to become someone else's plaything. Instead, his attention drifted to someone sitting quietly in the corner. That person's life energy was significantly higher than a regular human's. Among everyone in the tavern, they and Biscuit stood out the most. Though, in comparison to Biscuit, the person's energy was much weaker. With someone as irresistibly cute as me here, you still have the nerve to focus on someone else? The blonde girl stood, dusted off her dress, and sat down gracefully. Her hands rested neatly on her lap, and when she wasn't speaking, she carried herself with the elegance of a refined young lady. What are you doing here? Do you know that person? Seer pushed the untouched rainbow-colored cocktail in front of Biscuit, his gaze flickering briefly toward the man in the corner before returning. Marrow had already figured out that the white-haired boy and the blonde-haired girl were acquainted, so he kept his head low and didn't say a word. Not telling you. Biscuit sipped from the glass delicately, taking small, ladylike sips. Of course, even her drinking posture was incredibly cute. You, Marrow raised his head and glared at Biscuit angrily. You can't beat her, Marrow, Seer reminded in a light tone. If you can't win, you'd better stay quiet. The strong have the privilege of acting as they please. But that rule only applied to Marrow. Your hair's gotten a lot shorter, hasn't it? Thinking about cutting it even shorter? Seer asked lazily, with a faint smile. It was unclear whether it was genuine concern or provocation. It was definitely provocation. And whose fault was it? Biscuit furiously needed the tiger cub to vent her frustration. Then, as if a thought crossed her mind, a sly smile appeared on her face. You're in trouble now. Someone's got their eye on you. It's not just me who recognize the crystal feather bones. Why don't you hand it over to me? That way, no one will bother you anymore. Biscuit's smile seemed full of genuine concern and kindness, as though she truly had Seer's best interests in mind. She really was such a kind and lovely young lady. Is the person you're talking about that one? Seer brazenly turned to look directly at the man in the corner. Blonde hair, wearing either glasses or sunglasses. The lenses were semi-transparent, shaped like sharp triangles. The man, noticing Seer's bold and undisguised gaze, quickly looked back. Meeting his gaze, Seer smirked and mouthed deliberately. What are you looking at, trash? His tone was calm, but his expression was full of amusement. The blonde man froze, clearly not expecting to encounter someone like this. Cough, cough, Biscuit, who had been sipping her drink in small, ladylike sips to appear cute, couldn't help but choke. This kid, knowing full well that someone might be targeting him, he still went out of his way to provoke them? You've alerted him, Biscuit remarked. She couldn't understand Seer's reasoning. Based on the strength she had seen from him during their encounter in the desert, Seer's abilities were decent at best. Strong? Not exactly. At least, the aura he displayed at the time wasn't particularly overwhelming. What had been impressive was his sheer presence. And yet, the boy had managed to destroy the underground labyrinth beneath the desert, a feat she couldn't figure out how he achieved. For someone clever, the logical course of action would be to play dumb, wait for the opponent to make the first move, and then strike back at the right moment, flipping the situation in their favor. Battles between Nen users were about strategy and intellect. But this reckless move of Seer's made Biscuit think he had no brains. What's the big deal? The white-haired boy nonchalantly ordered another overpriced drink. I prefer letting my prey know that I've already spotted them. Now, find a way to keep hunting me. Seer propped his chin on one hand, his tone full of anticipation. How would they react once they realized they'd been discovered? Would desperation drive them to act rashly? The blonde-haired man, however, seemed unfazed by the provocation, remaining seated. Moments later, the tavern door opened again, and a group of people walked in. They headed straight toward the man, exchanged a few silent glances, and then he stood up and left with them. Not very direct, Seer sighed. Well, that was expected. After all, this wasn't some action-packed battle-centric world. In Hunter x Hunter, Nen users were all incredibly restrained? Or cautious? And the stronger they were, the more cautious they seemed. They rarely got into reckless fights without reason. Of course, exceptions existed, battle maniacs and criminals, for instance. Maybe they're plotting something behind the scenes, Biscuit teased in a mockingly sinister tone. Like planning to ambush you. But Seer had already turned his head toward the entrance. After the blonde-haired man and his group left, more people entered the tavern. This was the first time something caught his attention enough to make him turn his head. What, is it someone you know? Biscuit asked, also turning to look. A man with black hair, a bandage wrapped around his forehead, and dressed in a black suit walked through the door. Biscuit's eyes lit up immediately. Of course, it wasn't because of his handsome face, though admiring attractive men was one of her hobbies, but because something even more captivating had caught her eye. The pale blue earrings dangling from his ears. The color was so clear, so mesmerizing that it made her heart flutter. Liquid ore. That must be liquid ore. It was beautiful. She wanted it. Without hesitation, Biscuit rushed toward the man as he entered. Why is he here? Seer muttered, staring at the black-haired man. His gaze lingered on the bandage on the man's forehead and the earrings for a moment before his tone grew uncertain. This guy. Wasn't he Krlo Lucifer? A professional thief, leader of the Phantom Troop, and the brain of the Spider? Oh, and also the secret philanthropist of Meteor City. Do you know him, sir? Mero suddenly chimed in. I guess you could say that. He's a well-known Good Samaritan, Seer replied with a straight face. Of course, that title was known only to a select few in Meteor City. Mero scrutinized the new arrival but didn't sense any threatening aura. Satisfied, he turned his attention elsewhere. Meanwhile, Biscuit was nearly at the doorway, about to collide head-on with the man. He subtly shifted his shoulder, ready to sidestep her. At that exact moment, a deafening explosion erupted outside the tavern. The violent tremor knocked drinks off tables, sending them crashing to the floor. Many people, unsteady on their feet, fell over. Ah, how scary! Biscuit screamed, covering her face with her hands. She stumbled, dramatically altering her path to fall straight toward the black-haired man. The man politely extended his hands, catching her by the shoulders and steadying her before quickly letting go. Are you all right? He asked with a gentle smile. Every move he made radiated elegance and gentlemanly charm. Internally, Biscuit was squealing with excitement, but outwardly, she maintained the facade of a shy, innocent young lady. Thank you. She blushed appropriately, lifting the hem of her dress in a demure gesture of gratitude. I'm glad you're okay, he replied courteously. Completely ignoring the gunfire and explosions outside, as well as the swearing and shouting of the tavern's other patrons, this scene felt straight out of a shoujo manga, pink bubbles of Doki Doki floating everywhere. Watching this unfold, Seer silently turned away, burying his face in his arms as muffled laughter escaped him. PFFT. Ha ha ha. Two drama queens had finally crossed paths. Chapter 96. So it's already full, huh? Krlo's gaze swept over the interior of the tavern. He didn't insist and reached for the doorknob, preparing to leave. Attention! Everyone, stay inside. Do not go out. A bomber has infiltrated the area. We are conducting a search. Anyone who leaves will be considered a suspect. Please remain indoors. Krlo's hand froze on the door handle. A blonde girl clasped her hands in front of her chest. If you don't mind. My seat is over there. Her large, Fluttering eyes looked up at Krolo, shy yet inviting. "Of course, I don't mind." Krolo smiled, his deep black eyes unfathomable. This place was both a tavern and an inn. The first floor was a bar, while the second and third floors were guest rooms. He had originally planned to stay here for a while, enjoy the scenery, and perhaps find some interesting abilities. He hadn't expected to run into something like this as soon as he arrived. A bomber, huh? Recalling the few people he had brushed past on the street not long ago, Krolo smiled faintly. Biscuit led him to a seat at the bar. "My name is Biscuit. What about you?" She looked expectantly at the black-haired man. "I'm Krolo. And these two are?" Krolo glanced curiously at the blond young man and the white-haired boy. His gaze lingered for a moment on the small white tiger beside them. A white tiger cub with a single horn on its forehead? Now, that was rare. "Oh, this is my older brother," Biscuit said, pointing to the blond young man. "And this is my younger brother," she added, motioning to the white-haired boy. Two blondes, calling them siblings wasn't too much of a stretch. But with a white-haired one in the mix, things seemed a little off. Besides, they called themselves siblings, but there was an obvious sense of unfamiliarity between the two blondes. Krolo concealed his thoughts, keeping his expression warm and polite. "Marrow, Seer." The white-haired boy pointed at the blond young man first, then at himself. "Nice to meet you," Krolo nodded. "Krolo, what do you want to drink? My brother will pay for it." Biscuit patted her chest and declared loudly. Marrow, who had suddenly gained the title of older brother and was now expected to buy drinks for a stranger. He gripped his glass a little tighter. The man in charge said nothing. He probably wanted to see how things played out, so Marrow endured it. "By the way, Krolo, your earring is so pretty. It looks just like my brother's eyes." Biscuit's eyes sparkled as she stared at Krolo's earring. As if she was simply mesmerized by its beauty rather than suspecting it to be something else, like liquid mineral ore, for example. The black-haired man reached up, gently twisting his earring, his gaze landing on the girl's brother, the white-haired boy. "Those blue eyes. His eyes are more beautiful than my earring." Krolo lowered his hand and smiled. Yet, deep down, he felt as if his earring wasn't all that appealing anymore. He was getting tired of it. Once something rare and exquisite was in your possession, you would eventually realize it wasn't all that special. The so-called value and beauty were just illusions carefully crafted by others. "Stop looking at me like that." The white-haired boy frowned. Krolo's gaze. How should he put it? For someone who knew full well that this man was a thief, it was impossible to like. What did thieves do with things they found beautiful? They stole them. He had taken so many pairs of scarlet eyes already, there was no way he'd mind taking another pair. "No matter how beautiful my eyes are, they're not something you can wear as earrings." Seer's tone was ice cold. This was just too much. "I wouldn't think of such a thing." The black-haired man gave a refined smile. "Krolo, can your earring?" Biscuit was about to ask if she could take a closer look when... Bang! The tavern door was kicked open, and a squad of uniformed men stormed in. Everyone inside turned to look at the entrance. "Everyone, stand up and cooperate. We are conducting a search for explosives." A man, clearly the squad leader, issued the order. Though the patrons looked displeased, they had no choice but to comply. A woman wearing only a dress instinctively stepped back as a soldier's hands roamed over her body under the pretense of a search. And those 2 small steps cost her life. Resisting a search? She must be hiding something. The soldier who shot her down spoke as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Before long, it was Seer and the others' turn. The 4 of them had remained at the bar, their figures hidden behind the crowd. But now, as one person after another was checked, their presence became impossible to ignore. especially since, unlike everyone else who had stood up and cooperated, the four of them hadn't even bothered to get out of their seats. They continued their conversation, exuding an air of indifference, as if the situation unfolding before them was of no concern. It was infuriating. "You four, stand up." The soldiers pointed their guns at them. Judging by their clothing, they were obviously wealthy, but they weren't from this country. Foreigners daring to act so arrogantly on their turf. I said, "Stand the hell up." The squad leader, seeing no one complying, decided to make an example of one of them. His target was. A gunshot rang out, the bullet flying straight toward the white-haired boy. Annoying trash. Seer held his wine glass in one hand while forming a fist with the other, resting it horizontally against his chest. He then slowly rotated his palm downward and opened his fingers. A single bullet fell from his palm onto the floor with a crisp clink. The taste of the liquor has turned foul. The white-haired boy's gaze carried a trace of contempt. "Fire! Kill him!" the squad leader ordered. "Killing you myself would be a waste of my time," Seer sneered. "Marrow. Consider this your funeral toast for the same time next year." He tilted his glass upside down, letting the liquid spill onto the floor. The moment his words fell, the armed gang members inside the tavern froze mid-action, locked in place, guns still raised, transformed into a collection of ice sculptures. In front of Seer, several ice shields had formed, stopping the bullets in their tracks. The entire tavern was now filled with an eerie chill, and every breath from the patrons turned into visible white mist. "Hey, Krilo, let me borrow your earrings for a bit, won't you?" Biscuit asked, as if nothing had just happened, her voice light and casual. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. These were a gift from someone very important to me." The black-haired man's expression was filled with an apology so sincere that it made refusal seem like a painful necessity. It was impossible not to believe that he truly wanted to lend them to her, but that the request placed him in a difficult position. "Oh? Someone important? Could it be your lover, Krilo?" Biscuit pressed on, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "Well." Krilo gave a small, slightly embarrassed smile, neither confirming nor denying the assumption. From the moment they started speaking, apart from their names, not a single word exchanged between them had been the truth. Meanwhile, the rest of the tavern's patrons were now staring at the four of them in sheer horror. They had just wiped out an entire armed gang without breaking a sweat. Who were these people? "Throw this trash out," the white-haired boy instructed lazily. Immediately, someone eager to curry favor stepped forward to comply. The frozen bodies were dumped outside the tavern, and before long, they vanished without a trace. Not a single armed gang member returned to the tavern again. Chapter 97. Biscuit spent most of the day trying to get Krilo to remove his earrings, using every trick in the book, both directly and indirectly. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't get him to part with them. In the end, Krilo smiled gently and said it was getting late, so he was going to head back to his room to sleep. After he left, Biscuit sat in place, clenching her fists, her mind full of frustration. Damn it! What kind of luck was it that, in a single day, she encountered both the crystal feather bone and the liquid ore, two of the 7 beauties, only to find that both were already claimed? Was this good luck or bad luck? Sleep, sleep. Seer picked up the drowsy tiger cub, which was yawning, and made her way upstairs. Meanwhile, the tavern's patrons below sat upright, making not a single sound. They looked like a group of expertly crafted puppets, silently performing a mute play. It wasn't until Biscuit, dragging her skirt in frustration, followed Seer upstairs that everyone in the tavern breathed a collective sigh of relief. The four of them, who could casually chat in front of the pile of frozen corpses, made the others terrified of becoming the next ice sculptures. "Boss, can I still check out now?" Someone ran up to the bar, inquiring of the bartender who was also the tavern owner. Checking out is fine, but no refunds, the man replied with a sunny smile, cheerfully polishing a glass. A shady businessman. Those who wanted to check out quickly shrank back, no longer bringing up the subject. At 2 a.m., Seer was woken by a series of explosions. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the scent of alcohol evaporating in the smoke. Thick black smoke poured in through the door cracks, making the snoring white tiger on the floor sneeze uncontrollably. A faint airflow stirred inside the tiger's horn, dispersing the smoke that had come at them. Beasts were born with inherited skills, and as they grew, their abilities became more refined. "I can't even get a good night's sleep," Seer muttered, standing up to put on her clothes, washing up leisurely before grabbing the tiger cub and heading outside. As soon as he opened the door, a wave of hot air and smoke rushed in, and crimson flames had already spread down the hallway, the walls blackened from the fire. There were heavy footsteps both above and below, accompanied by occasional screams of pain. People staying in the rooms adjacent to Seer's, as well as the ones across the hall, had also stepped out of their rooms. These people were all well-dressed, not the kind who rushed out of their rooms in a panic wearing whatever clothes they grabbed. "Seriously, what's all this noise in the middle of the night?" Biscuit shouted, hands on her hips, her tone aggressive. "Girls need their beauty sleep. Did these people not understand that?" Krollo, holding a book, had apparently been reading all this time without sleeping. He didn't speak but instead gazed with deep, thoughtful eyes at the stairs leading down. "Seriously, now there's nowhere to stay," Seer sighed as she walked down the stairs. On the stairs and the floor below, there were several people lying crookedly, some with broken arms, others with broken legs. The common factor was that they were all alive, but unable to move. And each one had a bomb strapped to their bodies, with a countdown ticking away. The countdown was moving fast. Seeing the 4 people coming down, their eyes instantly lit up. They struggled, dragging their bloody bodies toward the 4, repeatedly bowing their heads in desperate pleas. "Please, save us. Please, I beg you, save me." Seer glanced at the bombs strapped to their bodies. With every bow and plea, the countdown seemed to speed up, but there was still a lot of time left, over 4,000 seconds. "This bomb's countdown is way too long, isn't it?" And unlike normal bombs, this was an N-bomb. So typical disarming methods wouldn't work on it. But what was the point of such a long countdown? Was this a limitation of the ability, or was there some other reason? If so, "This ability is pretty useless," the white-haired youth said dismissively, ignoring the pleas around him. After a brief inspection of the bomb, he straightened up, his tone filled with disdain. Though, it was still slightly better than his law wheel, which could only be used once every 2 days. His Nen ability seemed to have become somewhat useless too, it was now purely a support-type ability. Although there were many tarot cards, he still hadn't drawn a high-damage card. Should he add more restrictions and oaths to make it usable every day? But that would increase the limitations, wouldn't it? Ah, what a hassle. When it came to abilities, Satoru Gojo and Sukuna already seemed to be perfect, with no real weaknesses. The combination of high offense, high defense, and rapid healing was unbeatable. Meanwhile, the people who had been waiting for help were on the brink of madness. They stopped bowing and began staring at the 4 of them with eyes full of urgency, even tinged with hatred. "Come on, think of a way to save us. Aren't you strong?" they urged, complained, and a chorus of voices filled the air, creating an unbearably noisy atmosphere. "I won't save anyone, but I can help you by making sure you die before the bomb explodes." The white-haired youth stood calmly in place, only glancing at them out of the corner of his eye, too lazy to even look them in the face. If he had to give a reason, it was because he hadn't slept well and couldn't be bothered to save anyone. "Talking to adults like that and expecting us to save you? A bunch of lowly scum," the blonde youth added, speaking without any courtesy, his words dripping with malice. "I can't remove other people's abilities," Biscuit said, shaking her head. Nen abilities could only be dealt with when one understood the exact situation. But since they didn't even know what triggered the bombs, how could they talk about disarming them? Plus, they didn't even know where the bomb's owner was. Nearby the Roshan Mountains, the trio finally reunited. Leaving so many bombs behind, that white-haired kid definitely won't escape. The blonde man smiled, his expression showing both cunning and greed. A direct confrontation? No, he could feel the dangerous energy emanating from the youth. A head-on battle wasn't in line with his cautious style. It was better to find an opportunity to injure him severely and then take the spoils. Although he spent most of his time on Greedy Island, the real world still required attention. Moreover, they were working on behalf of the crows, so no matter how big the mess, someone else would take the blame. The reward would be cards from the game. It was a win-win deal. The three of them placed their thumbs together, speaking in unison. Release. In the inn. The time is definitely too long. This likely means the other side has another way to directly detonate the bombs, the dark-haired man said calmly. It shouldn't be likely, it should be certain. The moment his words fell, the bombs on the people's bodies, which had been rapidly counting down, immediately stopped, and the numbers reset to 0. In the next instant, several bombs exploded simultaneously. At the same time, explosions could be heard from the outside world, continuous and unrelenting. The entire street was blown to bits, filled with thick black smoke. Even above the mine site, columns of smoke were rising into the air. "Looks like we're camping now," Seer remarked as he stood in midair, observing the thick smoke below. There wasn't a speck of dust on him, his tone filled with resignation. Biscuit, Krilo, and Marrow's figures appeared from different directions. "My skirt," Biscuit looked at the hem of her skirt, now torn, and fumed. "What bad luck," Krilo sighed, a little dust on him as well. No matter where they stayed, they always ended up in such situations. Hey Hunter's mandatory cult break. Stretch your legs, hydrate, touch grass if possible, and whisper all hail Supreme Killua into the void. Now back to the fanfic grind. Blue heart emoji, high voltage sign emoji. Chapter 98. I was planning to go mining, Seer sighed as he looked at the distant, bombed-out mining site. A once-in-a-lifetime mining experience had ended before it even began. Now what? Where am I supposed to find liquid ore? He landed back on the ground, casually tossing the sleepy tiger cub onto the dirt. His tone carried a hint of frustration. Biscuit and Krilo both heard his muttering. Biscuit's expression was one of surprise, but she pointed at Krilo and said, "You came here to find liquid ore. Isn't that exactly what Krilo's earrings are made of?" Seer blinked, his gaze shifting silently to the two blue pendants hanging from Krilo's ears. At his feet, the tiger cub also looked up, eyes bright and focused on Krilo. Marrow, too, joined in staring. Biscuit, as if enjoying the show, watched Krilo with sparkling eyes. With 4 pairs of eyes fixed on him, Krilo sighed slightly, showing a helpless expression. He didn't even lower the book in his hand. So this is liquid ore. Doesn't look as impressive as the legends say, Seer mused inwardly, comparing the earrings to his 6 eyes in terms of aesthetic value. In the end, he came to a conclusion. The most beautiful blue thing in this world is definitely my eyes, he declared with absolute confidence. While you do have the right to say that, it's not exactly a good thing, Biscuit reminded him. Being associated with world-class beauty rarely led to a happy ending. So, what do you all plan to do now? Even if I say these aren't liquid ore, you wouldn't believe me, would you? Krilo spoke with a falsely wronged expression, clearly exasperated. He wasn't particularly eager to fight these people. The blonde youth wasn't too concerning, but the boy and girl, despite their youthful appearances, felt far more threatening. But if it came down to a fight? Krolow's book flipped open, the pages stopping on one in particular. Don't underestimate my eye for gemstones. As a gem hunter, I never misidentify a stone. Biscuit's voice was filled with absolute confidence in her abilities. Ah. I'd rather not fight you, though, Seer murmured, stroking his chin as if conflicted. After all, back in Meteor City, a lot of the food, clothes, and supplies he used had come from the Phantom Troop. Before Krolow could respond, he noticed that the boy who had just claimed he didn't want to fight had vanished from sight. At the same moment, the air behind him shifted. Krolow spun around immediately, his sharp eyes catching sight of Seer now standing at his back. Now that I think about it, I should probably thank you all for those supplies back then, Seer said, but even as he spoke, his hand was already reaching for Krolow's ear. Supplies? The Phantom Troop only ever sent supplies to one place. Meteor City. Was this boy also from Meteor City? Even as these thoughts flashed through his mind, Krolow didn't hesitate. His ability was already in motion. The shadow beneath him suddenly came to life, surging upward to block Seer's approach. At the same time, Krolow himself swiftly retreated from his original position. This was Light's Shadow, an ability recorded in Skill Hunter. It could only be used in environments with light, allowing the shadow to defend against attacks and counter enemies. However, the trade-off was that any damage inflicted on the shadow would also be felt by the user. And, of course, if the light disappeared, the shadow would vanish as well. The original owner of this ability had once caused considerable trouble using it. Krolow, relying on his harmless appearance, had befriended his target, gained their trust, and then stolen their ability. Shadows? I used to think about having an ability like this too, Seer mused as he observed the black silhouette before him. Something like the Shadow Army from that one anime, not necessarily the strongest, but undeniably cool. The shadow remained connected to Krolow's feet, its length changing as he moved. This ability had a range limit. As the elongated shadow stretched forward, it touched the shadow beneath Seer's feet. In an instant, his legs stiffened unnaturally, he couldn't move them. His own shadow was being invaded by the opponents. Manipulation type. Does the shadow control people? That thought had barely formed when his body abruptly appeared in the air. For him, using blue to teleport himself skyward didn't require moving his legs at all. A strong enough enhancement type user could probably brute force their way out of this ability as well. Of course, that was assuming only part of their body was affected. But if the entire shadow was taken over, would he still be able to use his abilities? Curious as he was, Seer had no intention of testing it on himself. Krolow didn't close his book, but the shadow quickly retreated back to him, returning to its normal state. His offensive capabilities were still somewhat lacking. But finding the right ability to steal wasn't easy. Not to mention, his ability required him to witness the target using their power firsthand and gather enough relevant information from them. To achieve that, he often spent time befriending his targets first. Progress was slow. Sometimes, the targets even saw through his intentions. And this white-haired boy in front of him. What was his ability? Suddenly, a blade of ice shot toward the back of his head. Krolow tilted his head slightly, narrowly dodging it. His shadow moved again, fast. In a fraction of a second, it invaded the shadow beneath the blonde youth. The blonde's expression twisted, but his body refused to obey him. Worse still, his attack changed course. The ice blade now flew straight toward the airborne seer. HxH. The white-haired boy extended his hand, red light flickering around it. A single red blast wouldn't kill Krolow himself, but what about the earrings? He had heard that liquid ore became quite fragile once it solidified. Guess I'll find out. Fine, I'll show you. Krolow suddenly spoke. A gut feeling, Or maybe his spider sense kept warning him not to take that unknown attack head-on. But without knowing his opponent's ability conditions, how was he supposed to dodge it? His opponent showed no true intent to kill. If they had, they would have simply attacked with that move from the start. Besides, Krilo himself was not a front-line fighter. And considering that this boy might also be from Meteor City, Krilo was willing to have a conversation. It was better to leave it at that. Closing the book in his hands, he released his control over the blonde youth. Seer, too, stopped his movements, the red glow fading from his hand. You should have said so earlier. I just wanted to borrow it for a look. Seer spoke with complete confidence as he walked up to Krilo and held out his hand. Krilo had no choice but to remove one of his earrings and hand it over. It was, indeed, liquid ore. As for where he had obtained it, did a thief ever need to explain where their treasures came from? Liquid ore accessory detected, not raw ore, not eligible for collection. Congratulations, host has obtained Krilo's earring, bound, cannot be unbound, can be replicated. Would you like to replicate this item and list it in the marketplace for sale? The host will receive 1% commission on the sale price. 3 unexpected system notifications popped up. So Krilo's earring could be copied and sold in the system's marketplace. And it was actually classified as a bound item? 1%? That's straight-up exploitation, Seer complained internally. The energy required for replication is provided by the system, as is the energy for transaction transfers. After analysis, a 1% cut is extremely reasonable. Oh, sure, reasonable, for a profiteering system that takes the lion's share. Hey. Still, profit was profit. It was an unexpected bonus, after all. Do it, Seer replied in his mind. Replication successful. Item has been listed in the system marketplace. Here. Seer tossed the earring back to Krilo. Chapter 99. The battle had barely begun, just a brief exchange, and it was already over. That's it? Biscuit looked utterly confused. The liquid ore was already in hand. Shouldn't they have just taken it and run? Did this kid really have such a strong moral compass? He really just borrowed it for a look and gave it back. What do you take me for? Seer shot Biscuit an exasperated glance. You natives might not have morals, but I do. Thick black smoke spread across half the sky, the wind carrying fine dust through the air. Seer raised a hand to cover his nose, avoiding the awkwardness of sneezing. I thought you'd be a little more reckless, Biscuit said ambiguously. Like back in the desert, when he had acted as if even if I can't win, I can still take you down with me. There was no need to. The white-haired boy patted Marrow's shoulder. The blonde youth's expression was twisted with guilt. Getting controlled by Krilo's ability wasn't surprising. If anything, it would have been strange if Krilo couldn't control him. Krilo might be the brain of the Phantom Troop, but that didn't mean he couldn't fight. His combat ability just wasn't as straightforward as the troop's main fighters. Even in battle, Krilo was the type to fight with his mind, turning the tables, outsmarting stronger opponents. That was just Seer's guess, based on a few video clips he had come across before. I'm not enemies with Krilo, and he hasn't done anything bad to me, Seer said, shifting his gaze from the little tiger gnawing on Krilo's pants. If anything, he had been the one eyeing Krilo's earrings. But it was just borrowing for a look, no big deal. He hadn't expected the system to classify them as bound items. He had assumed it would just take them. And guilt? Completely unnecessary. If you're willing to kill, you should be prepared to be killed. So if you're a thief, you should be prepared to have things stolen from you. That was only fair. Krilo glanced down at the small tiger clinging to his pants and let out a soft chuckle. We're leaving, Seer said, nudging the bold little cub with his foot. The cub flopped onto the ground, shook its head, then quickly scrambled to follow him. Now that they had the liquid ore, they could leave. Sticking around any longer and Krilo might actually try to befriend him. Though, Gojo and Sukuna's ability shouldn't be stealable, right? Different systems entirely. "You're not here for the gemstone auction?" Biscuit asked curiously. Most people in the area at this time were here for the auction, an annual grand-scale gemstone trade fair. That was why she was here, after all. "Never heard of it." The white-haired boy tossed out the words without looking back as he walked away. What a strange kid. But he was definitely stronger than when she had first met him in the desert. His growth rate was insane. "Krilo, want to go to the auction with me?" Biscuit asked, turning away from the boy's retreating figure. Her smile was shy, expectant. "Of course." The dark-haired man smiled back, as if he had already forgotten how she had been the one to point out his earrings were liquid ore, causing him all that trouble. Two people, neither of whom could be trusted to tell the truth, decided to travel together. Before authorities could lock down the airspace over Rocario, Seer and his group had already boarded a blimp and left. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the sky, they had flown past Rocario's borders and were soaring over the vast ocean. Seer sat by the window, enjoying the view. Occasionally, he glanced at Mero, who was brooding in the corner, radiating a gloomy aura. Ever since getting controlled by Krilo, the guy had been stuck like this. Seer wasn't in the mood to comfort him, but his negativity was really ruining the peaceful atmosphere. Lazily, he poured himself a glass of milk, took a sip, and finally spoke. "Do you even know who that guy was?" Mero turned his head, looking completely out of it. "An A-rank wanted criminal. Leader of the Phantom Troop. Currently has a bounty of 1 billion. Anyone with a bounty exceeding 100 million was a NEN user. 500 million was a significant tier, and 1 billion was a whole different level. In other words, if someone put up $1 billion commission for the Zulks to take down the troop, they might not even accept it, because they'd consider it a terrible deal. If Mero ever became a wanted criminal, getting past 100 million would already be impressive. As for Seer, his bounty was definitely above 500 million, possibly reaching 1 billion, after all, he was a solo act. Group bounties always ran higher. He's the leader of the Phantom Troop. I couldn't even tell. Mero muttered blankly. There was no sign of it. The guy looked like a well-mannered, harmless rich kid. Probably because he wasn't slicking his hair back. Seer's expression was hard to describe. When Krilo was in spider mode with his hair slicked back, he definitely looked more thief-like. Mero couldn't even imagine what that would look like. So it's normal that you couldn't match him. If he were serious. The white-haired boy's lips curled. You'd be dead, he said it lightly, almost offhandedly. Mero's expression tensed. He had no doubts about the strength of a billion-dollar thief. But what really unsettled him wasn't the power gap, it was the fact that, after being controlled, he had attacked his master. He had been too weak. That was why he had been manipulated so easily. And there had to be others in the world with similar abilities. What if this happened again? He couldn't accept it. The idea of becoming a blade turned against his own master. Even if he had been controlled, that was still betrayal. If that ever happened again, he'd rather just die. Master. The blond youth suddenly dropped to his knees, forehead pressing against the ground. All Seer could see was the back of his head. If I ever lose control and attack you again, please kill me immediately. His hands were planted firmly on the floor, and he never once looked up. Ah. So that's what he's been brooding over, how his target changed mid-fight. How should he respond to this? It's fine. I don't care. Seer waved a hand dismissively, looking completely unconcerned. Because, Mero, your strength is super weak. He beamed, voice filled with amusement. "Even if you were controlled and tried to attack me, you wouldn't be able to land a hit." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. In fact, he thought his reassurance was very considerate from all angles. Mero, however, seemed to go even paler. "I understand." He lowered his head further. He had to get stronger. Even if he was controlled again, he needed to be able to break free. He could never cause trouble for his master again. Even if his master probably didn't even consider his strength capable of being a problem. Chapter 100. The airship had been flying for a long time before finally reaching the marked location on the map, Antarctica. It was said that whitefire fish only lived in the deep polar seas, meaning either the Arctic or the Antarctic. But the moment they arrived, an overwhelming flood of indescribable information and images poured into Seer's mind all at once. Massive ships had once passed through here, traveling toward distant lands. There had been storms. Colossal magical beasts had appeared, bringing disaster after disaster. He couldn't make out their exact forms. He couldn't see the details of what had happened. His head throbbed, a sharp, stabbing pain pulsing through his skull. His mind felt unbearably heavy, like it was swelling and about to burst. A dizzy, foggy sensation clouded his thoughts. Did I just see something I wasn't supposed to? Seer collapsed onto the sofa, clutching his nose as blood poured out. Getting bombarded with too much information and nearly losing his mind. This reaction felt suspiciously like encountering some kind of eldritch god. Actually, now that he thought about it, Gojo Satoru's domain, Unlimited Void, was very eldritch. Overloading someone with information until they lost their ability to think or move, what kind of forbidden-to-behold cosmic horror was that? If he ever got the chance, he had to cosplay as an unseeable six-eyed eldritch god Gojo Satoru. Anyone who dared to make eye contact would instantly get hit with Unlimited Void. His mind drifted with these absurd thoughts, trying to distract himself from the relentless headache. It took nearly 10 minutes before the ringing in his ears finally subsided. Ugh. Curled up on the couch from the pain, Seer gasped for breath as he turned over. One hand covered his eyes, while the other clutched his chest, feeling the wild pounding of his heart. The last time he felt this messed up was back in the mirror maze, after staying up for days straight trying to beat that damn thing. "Master? Master? Are you okay?" Ah woo. As his hearing fully returned, so did his vision, along with Mero and the tiger cub's worried voices. "Ah, just an old issue. It's nothing." The white-haired boy sat up and glanced down at his shirt, which was now stained red with blood. He clicked his tongue in annoyance. When his brain short-circuited like that, he ended up just as paralyzed as anyone caught in Unlimited Void, meaning he couldn't even wipe the blood off himself. As for the flood of useful and useless information that had flashed through his mind, it was probably about the Dark Continent. In the Hunter world, if there was anything people avoided talking about, it was that place. Even though he hadn't read the later parts of the manga, he knew about that terrifying land. "Make me some tea." He reached into Storage Curse's mouth, pulled out a packet of medicine, and handed it to Mero. It was just some blood loss, no big deal. As long as he hadn't cried, it was fine. Real men bleed, but they don't cry. If he had broken down sobbing, that would have been truly embarrassing. After standing up, he went to take a shower and change his clothes. He spent a good while staring in the mirror, making sure he still looked like a stylish, aesthetically conscious young man. Once satisfied, he stepped out of the bathroom. Mero was already waiting outside the door, holding a cup of freshly brewed medicine. Seer took the cup and downed it in one go. "Master, you..." Mero hesitated, his eyes full of concern. But before he could say anything, Seer turned and opened the airship's hatch mid-flight. "Let's go." He didn't give Mero a chance to react. With a single kick, he sent him flying out of the airship. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed the tiger cub and jumped after him. Woohoo! What did it feel like to free fall from 2,000 meters up without a parachute or any protective gear? It felt fun. Thrilling enough to make him forget all the pain from earlier. Especially watching Mero plummet while screaming, that was absolutely hilarious. At least the guy was smart enough to use Nen to shield himself. Just before hitting the ocean, he even froze himself into an ice statue, crashing into the water like a massive iceberg. The impact shattered the ice, but thanks to his layered defenses, Mero remained unharmed. Seer also hit the sea hard, but quickly surfaced and swam back up. That was fun, right? No time to overthink things now, huh? He said matter-of-factly, watching Mero gasp for breath as he recovered from the fall. As if everything he did was for the other person's own good. Definitely not because he was just in the mood for some fun. What? Mero's thoughts were still sluggish. This was too intense. It was his first time experiencing something like this. From that height. If he weren't a Nen user, he'd be dead for sure. You should get used to it. I don't like boring days. Seer casually found a floating tree branch, hung the tiger cub onto it, and then dove back underwater. He was heading into the deep sea to search for Whitefire. Interesting, Mero murmured as he calmed his breathing. He glanced at the tiger cub, who was flailing around and yowling. Yes. This was the kind of life he wanted, he was absolutely certain of it. December 30, 1998. The 287th Hunter exam, online registration closed. It had been about 8 or 9 months since Seer had gone deep-sea diving for Whitefire. In that time, he had successfully found the fish, captured multiple wanted criminals, and raised his compatibility scores with both Gojo Satoru and Sukuna to 50. Naturally, he had also become a 1-star bounty hunter. He had started gaining some recognition in the industry, even to the point where people were willing to pay specifically to hire him. For example, a wealthy man named Vatera had sent another 1-star bounty hunter to negotiate with him. One look with his 6 eyes was enough to analyze the guy. This George or whatever had clearly been living comfortably for a while. He probably hadn't fought with his full strength in a long time. My employer is looking for a Greed Island consul, said the man, an imposing, broad-shouldered guy with thick black sideburns that made his eyebrows look like those of the white-browed Hawk King. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his deep voice carrying a certain weight. If you can help him clear the game, he's willing to pay 50 billion jenny. He studied the white-haired boy before him. Without the use of Nen, it was impossible to gauge Seer's true strength. But the fact remained, this kid had become a 1-star hunter in an incredibly short amount of time. And more importantly, he had no records of capturing anyone alive. Every single bounty target had been handed over to the authorities as a corpse. That's why people called him the Bounty Devil, he never left anyone breathing. 50 billion, huh? Seer tilted his chin slightly, his expression indifferent, as if this was nothing more than pocket change. A sum that would make 95% of the world go crazy, yet he didn't seem remotely interested. Playing a game does sound a little appealing. Seer rested his chin on one hand, speaking slowly. Greed Island. That name sounded weirdly familiar. It was in the original story, wasn't it? If even he, who had only read part of the original, could remember it, then it must have been a major plot point. But I recently accepted a job from the examination committee, he sighed, then chuckled lightly. I'm going to be an examiner for this year's Hunter exam. Your employer doesn't mind waiting for me, does he? Seer had received the offer from the examination committee on December 20th. They had asked him to be one of the examiners for the 287th Hunter exam, and had specifically instructed him not to reveal the exam's location. Of course, he had accepted immediately. After all, The main character squad was taking the exam this year. And he had the chance to be an examiner and test them? Who in their right mind would pass up an opportunity like that? A hunter examiner? George looked surprised. He had never heard of an examiner this young before. Then again, he had also never seen a one-star hunter this young, either. What a freakishly strong monster. I don't think my employer will mind, George finally said. He's in no rush, he hasn't even found a Greed Island console yet. Then let's talk after this year's exam ends, Sear said lazily, nodding toward the blonde-haired young man beside him. Leave your contact information. Mero immediately handed George his phone. As for giving this guy Master's direct contact info, not a chance. He wasn't worthy. Master didn't need to be bothered with something this trivial. Mero would handle it himself.